Цареграді славних козаченьків, вражі бусурмани вішали на гак. Глянувши востаннє на цей світ біленький, у смертну годину козак мовив так: хай живе, живе вільна Україна, хай живуть, живуть вічно козаки, хай цвіте червона калина, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки. Як вороги кляті нас на кіл саджали, як живцем палили, у смолі пекли. Козаки у хата життя не благали, про долю країни думи їх були. Хай живе, живе вільна Україна, хай живуть, живуть вічно козаки, хай цвіте червона калина, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки. Щоб буяла воля, щоб раділи люди, дай Бог їм останнє ці слова сказать. Хай живе, живе вільна Україна, хай живуть, живуть вічно козаки, хай цвіте червона калина, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки. Живе вільна Україна, хай живуть, живуть вічно козаки, хай цвіте червона калина, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки. Хай живе, живе вільна Україна, хай живуть, живуть вічно козаки, хай цвіте червона калина, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки. Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посорбати довбані щі, та трохи у щах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Зі сходу припхались до нас барани, для восстановлення великої страни, найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи, всяке озброєння, різне, ракети, потужні машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, і ми зачаїли на орків образу, з бандитів російських робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, на вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто ж винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає їх цар.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm joined by Enforcer Matt.
Hello, everybody.
And tonight we are running the Day 81 stream of the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. It has been one hell of a day. Lots of stuff has happened, and we're starting to see a lot of changes here on the front lines on many different areas. Before we actually get into even touching on the news, I'm of course going to recognize tonight's fundraiser. Tonight's fundraiser is for the UNHCR. That stands for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. The High Commissioner for Refugees of the United Nations focuses on humanitarian aid and providing support to Ukrainian refugees that have been displaced, more like it, from their country. Millions of Ukrainians have fled the state as the war has ensued, and so tonight's fundraiser, of course, is to try and get as much help as possible once again for the UNHCR, which has been on the stream before and got a large amount of support then. I want to remind everyone that $110 is the exact amount needed to support a refugee family with the basic supplies required for survival for 1 month. So if you would like to help out exactly one Ukrainian refugee family for 1 month of time, $110 is the gold number. So I hope that we can get a large amount of support, and also to answer some people's questions that's mostly on everyone's minds is who's going to be our guest star tonight? Is it Starsky? Is it Funker 530? Who's it going to be? The answer is that tonight, and bear with me, let me explain this. No one will be our guest star for the night. We're not having one tonight. Starsky was supposed to be on this Sunday, but I actually told him to come on next Sunday, and that's because next Sunday is going to be the biggest fundraiser in this channel's history in terms of the people who will be here with me, what we're going to be doing. It's going to be huge, to say the least. And so we're going to make a massive, massive goal for next week. And to let y'all know, we're going to have Funker 530, and we're going to have Operator Starsky on stream at the exact same time. Of course, the goal behind this is for everyone in the YouTube world that focuses on this war to come over here and give as much support as possible to help out the Ukrainians. That's been the primary goal of this channel, is to help them out. The Sunday night fundraisers are something that I am incredibly proud to run, and I'm incredibly proud that this Leaf Spring Army is able to pull through and get this kind of support every single time for every single fundraiser we've run. Right now, we've raised around $250,000 in support of Ukraine through various nonprofit organizations, just like this one. And I do have to say, I thank you all so much for helping us to continue and do all of the wonderful work we do. I actually saw a video today, just for y'all to think about, that actually was pretty tough for me to watch. It was a video of a kid, and he was dying, and he was in Ukraine, and I'm not going to go beyond that. It was a very rough video, and so when you think about the Ukrainian citizens, I can understand why a lot of them, millions of them, have fled the country because they don't want that kind of stuff happening to their family. So make sure to keep that in mind, and if that doesn't encourage you to donate and help out these refugees who are in a very tough situation and need all the help they can, I don't know what will. But with that, let's go over tonight's schedule for the news. Starting off, we will actually be starting off in Kyiv, as usual it seems, with one bit of news from the Brovary area. It's of course a nice little bit of news, not really exactly frontline news, but it's still neat to see, and so I'm going to let y'all see that. We're then going to move into Russia, where we've of course seen some wild stuff being said by Russian state TV today, which isn't out of the norm, but still, it's to be expected at this point, but still insane nonetheless. We're then going to move down towards the location unknowns, and we're actually going to cover all of the location unknowns as well. So the Kyiv, Moscow, and location unknown news will all be covered in the same segment. We'll then take a pause while we're moving to the Harkeev front and recognize some of our largest supporters of this fundraiser for the night. I'm sure Narya will be one of those incredibly soon. If y'all don't know, Narya is the legend behind our fundraisers, who right now holds the record at $5,000 in a single donation to one of our fundraisers. So I don't think anyone's going to be beating Narya tonight. I would like to see someone try, but Narya is the heavy hitter, and so just wait, it will pop up, and once it does, I want everyone to give Narya a load of support for doing all the help that they've been doing to help out Ukraine. Once we recognize all of those massive donors that we have here in this fundraiser, and also answer a few questions from the chat, we're then going to move into the Harkeev area and also cover the Donbass as well. Once we cover all of this area, we're actually going to recognize large donors once more and answer several questions on our way to Mariupol. Once we cover those questions and also recognize the donors, we'll then wrap up today's news by covering the remainder of what's in the southern front, and finally, listening to the speech from President Zelensky. Then we'll be sitting here cheerleading like we do to try and get this fundraiser as high as it can go, and once again, get as much support as possible for the humanitarian and nonprofits that are doing incredible work in Ukraine. And so, we're going to start off our news today in Brovary, where today we've seen someone visiting their grandmother in the liberated village of Brovary. At one point, Brovary was actually under Russian control for a short while, but they were pushed out about a month ago, and then the Russian front pretty much collapsed promptly afterwards. So here we can see a grandmother just wandering around their house, and this guy, who's apparently a family member, filming her. So it's an incredibly neat little video, very cute too, so I'm going to let y'all see it.
I like this guy.
And so we can see the end of the video there, but of course, a very sweet little video of a cute babushka, if you would like to call her that, inside of her little house and just going about her daily life in the liberated village of Brovary. Of course, wonderful to see, and I wanted to include it in tonight's stream just because it was a pretty cool little clip. And so, we're now going to move from cool clips to disturbing clips, where, of course, Russian state TV is saying the wildest things, and we can now see them saying that disliking Russia as a whole makes you a Nazi. So let's check out this clip, because now they're starting to redefine what makes a Nazi a Nazi. Very interesting to me, so here's the video. And I'll actually be reading off the translation at the bottom, because most of y'all cannot see it, and I want to make sure that y'all are able to see and hear what it says. So, who says that Russophobia is not a type of Nazism? Who says that? Even being a Jew, Zelensky, who probably can't recite Shema Yisrael, Zelensky, with his Russophobia, has acquitted himself? Can't a Jew also be a Russophobe? Demanding various punishments for Russian people? Solely for being Russian and their Russian culture? Why would that be? Is this an indulgence? Is this normal? Does the civilized world think this is acceptable? Phenomenal Russophobia, prevalent in the world today. Is that not the new type of Nazism? And so now we can see here that the Nazis themselves, the modern day equivalent of the Nazis, are now saying that everyone else in the world is Nazis for deposing their Nazism. And now that's crazy to me, because we've seen them doing the most Nazi fascist-like stuff that you've ever seen in the modern world. They go through towns in Ukraine and they just slaughter people and rape them. We've seen that over and over again. There's more than enough evidence to confirm that now. We then see them pretty much saying that Ukrainians are a lesser people. We also see them doing the Mein Kampf maneuver, saying that they claim all of the lands west of their country because they're historically Russian and the Russians need it to survive. That's exactly the same thing that the Lebensraum policy of Adolf Hitler suggested back in the day before World War II occurred in the Mein Kampf. Y'all can go back and read that if y'all want. And you can see here that they're doing the exact same thing, and then the audacity of a guy in Russia pretty much supporting a modern Nazi party in its actual carrying out of its, I guess you could say, ambitions, and sit there and say that everyone in the world who is sanctioning our Nazis are Nazis. That's something ironic to me and just insane when you really hear it out of someone's mouth in Russia. So, we're not going to go any further on that. That was just insane to watch. So we're now going to move down into the location unknowns, where we can see that the Ukrainians are whipping the Nazis pretty well. So starting off, we can see that the Russians tested out a drone today. Well, actually, the Ukrainians tested out a Russian drone, and we can see how well Russian free, quote-unquote, according to them, technology works. Let's take a look at this. Not well. As you can see there, the drone, of course, didn't work well. It didn't really look like they actually tried. It looks like they just kind of threw it into the bush for the heck of it. But still, Incredibly funny video to see. And also, I gotta say, I like this guy's mask. I haven't seen and the exact mask pattern that's on this one. Of course, there's always like the little scolding that's on all kinds of masks, but I haven't seen this exact pattern. I have to say, I'm a big fan of it. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see Ukrainian mortar team in operation. This Ukrainian mortar team appears to be using one of the larger models, apparently a 105 or 120 caliber from what I can tell, although I may not be exactly accurate on that. Here we can see them operating the piece.
Четвертый мина в стволе.
Третьему одну мину огонь.
We can now see the mortars being fired.
После.
Волки Днепр. Выстрел. Прием. Они дали серьезно, я так понимаю.
Улыбнитесь.
So, incredibly interesting to see, of course, and also, it's good to see that the Ukrainians are not just focusing on the heavy artillery alone, they're focusing on the lighter artillery pieces that are most likely operated by the infantry alone, such as these mortars. We have seen a couple of videos today of some of these heavy mortars and also light mortars being used in unison with the infantry, and that is critically important for the infantry to possess. It can't be understated that while heavy artillery is incredibly important in winning wars, lighter artillery is also incredibly crucial to the infantry achieving their goals if they don't have a large amount of tank support. For example, let me explain how this kind of works. Let's say that your unit is pinned down and attached to your unit is a small little mortar squad, if you would like to call it that. That little mortar squad is obviously not being pinned down with your squad. They're most likely at least 100 yards away, well, at least within eyesight, but they are far enough away that they're most likely out of the line of fire or out of danger for that moment. That mortar can then set up and fire a couple of rounds, of course, because mortars are shorter range and they also use a smaller caliber, which means that a lot more ammunition, or some ammunition, can be carried around by the infantry. They then fire a few rounds at those enemy forces. They suppress them with a mortar fire, which allows that squad to be freed up and then start moving around again, either to retreat from the area or start advancing at the enemy units. So you can see right there in that quick explanation, it's not a perfect explanation. Don't take that as like the textbook way how a mortar is used, but as you can see there how beneficial and important having a mortar attached to your infantry units is, because a mortar fire can be much more instantaneous than, say, a heavy artillery piece that is miles behind the lines. It has to adjust its range from there, get a few ranging shots, and then start dropping rounds. The mortars can do all of that a lot quicker just because they're that much closer to the front lines. And also, that's really the entire reason, actually. I would go through a whole entire list, but the entire reason is that they're much closer to the front lines. They're directly attached to infantry units, and so they provide that desperate amount of support that they need sometimes to help them achieve their objectives or get out of a dangerous situation. Wonderful to see that they still have them, and so we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see that more British Brimstones are in action. You heard that right. We saw one video the other day of Brimstones being used in some kind of improvised launcher, and today, in this clip, we can once again see British Brimstones being used. As you can see here, they're being launched. Once again, launching in a very typical fashion like the Brimstones we saw yesterday. They are, of course, the same missile. And we can see them here hitting some kind of vehicle. It looks like an MTLB, but considering that the camera is this close to it, I don't know how they got that footage. But it's still wonderful to see that the Ukrainians have been getting a large amount of foreign aid, and one of those pieces of foreign aid has been the Brimstone missile. So, very happy to see that, and it is wonderful to know that the Ukrainians are going to be able to continue on the fight in much more advanced ways technologically than they have been at the beginning of the war. On to the next bit of location unknown news. We can see the Ukrainians using a grenade launcher. Of course, the Russians have always been using AGS grenade launchers. This does appear to be a different variant of a grenade launcher. It doesn't look like an AGS. But here we can see that they've apparently fired a large amount of grenades in this one foxhole, and we can see the soldier continue to lay down the fire. Of course, it does have copyrighted music. I had to check, but here's the video. You can now see him firing the piece. And now he stopped firing. It looks like he's going to start reloading the grenade launcher, but hopefully this is being used to great effect. In the next bit of location unknown news, we can see a Ukrainian group of engineers making a pontoon bridge. Pontoon bridges have been making the news very frequently lately, as a matter of fact, considering that 2 BTGs from the Russian side were wiped out completely trying to cross a pontoon bridge that they made. We can now actually see a clip here of the Ukrainians making their own pontoon bridge, and it's a very interesting thing to watch. Here we can see something of a pontoon, I guess you could say, section. And what's really cool to me, and I didn't actually know this until now, is that apparently the Soviet-made pontoon bridges, maybe all of them, are kind of shaped where the truck looks like a command post vehicle in a way. But this is actually the bridge, and you'll see it slide off the back of the truck right here. Oh, the graphics went down, but let me see if I can fix that real quick. There we go. And now you can see the pontoon bridge piece sliding off the back of the truck into the water. It looks like it hit the bottom for a second, and now it's going to expand out sideways. And now the graphics quality is dropped again. And now it's in the river, pretty much completely set up already. Now all that has to be done is that the engineers here on the pontoon bridge drag this piece over to the rest of them and then connect them. So it's like a large Lego set in a way. It's very cool to see, and it's very interesting to see a pontoon bridge be set up. This is something we don't see a lot on film, and so seeing this instance is incredibly interesting. I believe this is the first time we've ever seen a pontoon bridge being constructed in the middle of the war. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a Grad ammunition depot being destroyed by the Ukrainians. With that, here's the video. Of course, I have to keep it muted. But we can see here some Russian vehicles on the tree line. They are Grads, and we can see a couple of other vehicles in the tree line. I think it's at Uragan. I'm not entirely sure. I can't read Cyrillic all too well. But we can now see that exact same tree line on the drone footage, and the bomb has already hit the Grad munitions and it's caused an explosion. That is what you just saw right there. And we can now see one of the vehicles, or the little depot itself, brewing up down there as the Ukrainians have scored a critical hit on that Russian artillery unit. Very interesting to see, and it's wonderful to know that the Ukrainians are still conducting precision attacks on the Russian units and causing large amounts of damage. As far as we know, the Russians have lost around a third or half of their initial invasion force, which is a massive amount of losses to take, considering that this war was supposed to be won within 48 to 72 hours, based off of what everyone was thinking at the very start. With that, we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a BTR-82 drone strike. This drone strike was conducted by a Ukrainian drone. Of course, I do have to mute it. But here we can see the drone scouting around for this BTR-82, and we can now see it here on the camera. The drone has now hit the BTR-82. It appears on the side of the vehicle, and it looks like it may have caught fire. We can now see what appears to be a second hit on the BTR. And we can now see a bomblet being dropped once again onto the BTR. This time it is hit directly on the center and rear of the vehicle, most likely causing irreparable damage to the actual chassis and structure of the armored personnel carrier, most likely leading to the death of the crew or the abandonment by the crew, if they're still alive. We can now see another bomblet being dropped onto that BTR-82, and then the footage ends. I'm sure that by the amount of bomblets alone that have been dropped on this BTR-82, along with its paper-thin armor that the BTRs are known for, I believe this vehicle has most likely been disabled, although that is a bit of an assumption to make, considering that we weren't able to confirm that on the film, and they were still dropping bomblets on it when this film ended. So we'll of course have to wait and see if we can get any confirmed information about the destruction of that BTR-82, and so we're going to move on to the next bit of news, where we can once again see the Ukrainians fawning over the brand new artillery piece they have, the M777, one of America's pride and joys, designed by the British and shipped really and made all around the world. We know that the Estonians, the Australians, the Canadians, the Americans, and several other countries have lended their M777s to the Ukrainians in their defense. And so we can see the Ukrainians using them the best they can. We can now see a Ukrainian soldier adjusting the piece. We can now see them elevating the piece and preparing it to fire. We can now see them loading the piece. And I have to say, I may be a little bit biased, but the M777 has to be one of the most beautiful artillery pieces in the modern world. I have to say, it's probably one of the coolest looking. I've actually seen one of these in person, and they are as cool in person as they look on video. I can tell you that. We can now see that the piece is fired. And here in this video, and I want to rewind this M777 looks like it was recoiling harder than any other M777 we've seen on film. Usually the recoil is pretty decent and not too grand, not too weak, to explain it the best way I can. It's just recoil. In this video, this thing looks like it was about to flip backwards. I don't know if that's because they were loading some kind of a hot load, if you can do that. I think the actual shell and the propellant are loaded in two separate stages, and so I think you can actually change the amount of powder in, I guess, the charge. Well, in the charge, yeah, kind of like you would in a Civil War artillery piece, and I believe that's what they may have done, because the recoil here was unbelievable. But let's watch that again. I mean, like, jeez. That's something. It may also be because of the high elevation. I may just be talking on my rear end there about a hot charge. Well, a hot load, I guess you could call it. We can now see two of the pieces being prepared to fire. We can now see it being fired again. And I have to say, that is very large amount of recoil. We can now see one of the Oshkosh trucks that the United States also landed with the pieces being moved forward, most likely to conduct the usual shoot and scoot strategy that all artillery participates in these days. It is normal for the pieces to fire a couple of rounds and then for them to be packed up and moved on to another location. If artillery sits in one spot for too long, they could be subjected to counter battery fire, which is where enemy artillery targets that artillery and either wipes it out or causes heavy damage to the unit. So impressive to see that not only are these artillery pieces being used heavily by the Ukrainians now, but they are actually following the proper strategy, at least as we can see on film, of shooting and scooting, where they shoot their salvo and then they pack up and they run on to the next location, or they just get out of there. Wonderful to see, and I can't wait to see even more videos and information of the M777s, which the Americans pride themselves for having a large amount of them, and I've had a lot of British viewers pride themselves on the actual artillery piece being designed by the British. And I have to say, the British hit it right with this one. The M777 is one of the most beautiful looking artillery pieces in the world, and it's also has one of the farthest ranges for a towed artillery piece, and a much farther range than its eastern counterparts that the Russians are fielding. So in terms of counter battery fire, it's not going to run into a lot of it just because of its range. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see some low-flying Ukrainian jets. So here's the video. It is a pretty cool one. We can see the Su-25s out there popping flares and chaff, most likely, as they're trying to get out of the zone. And they are low, and it's impressive to see. We can actually see another Su-25 out there on the ground, pretty much, popping its flares as well, as it's trying to get out of the area. Now, we started seeing a new trend these days, and I'm very happy to see it. We've seen that the Ukrainian Air Force has returned to the skies. During the last month and a half really, we haven't seen anything, hardly, of the Ukrainian Air Force. But as time keeps on going by, we're starting to see more and more videos of them making appearances out there on the battlefield. For example, we're starting to see a decent amount of their Su-25s flying around, time and time again. Today, just to let you all know what's in store, we actually saw that a Ukrainian Su-27 was flying around the actual battlefield at a pretty decent altitude, actually, providing support to the infantry. This is telling us one thing, and it's a very important thing. Russian air defenses are weakening. the Ukrainian Air Force would not jeopardize itself by sending aircraft out into a hostile airspace that will most likely lead to the aircraft being shot down. It's a suicidal risk. You'll only be losing aircraft and you'll be gaining nothing from it. And based off of these videos that we've been seeing for the past few days, where we're seeing more and more Ukrainian Air Force activity, this is letting us know that the Russian Air Force is being used much less, and so the threat of them being shot down by enemy aircraft is incredibly low. And Russian anti-air defenses have been weakened to the point that it's now been deemed a necessary risk to send aircraft out on sorties to the front line. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a Ukrainian infantry group using a 60mm mortar. Once again, following up on that heavy mortar talk I was saying earlier, we can now see the light mortars being used by the Ukrainian artillery as well. Here we can see them fire off 3 rounds. Now we can see them cease firing, and it looks like they're now adjusting the piece.
Bill 3.
That's the end of the video, and we can see, much like I was talking about earlier, the light mortars are being used by the infantry to help them push their objectives or make sure that their actual unit does not get in a tricky situation, because heavy artillery may have a long lag time and they may need a small amount of firepower right there. So, like seeing it, it's of course interesting to see that the Ukrainians are using a wide variety of munitions and pieces on film, and so I hope that they continue to have the supplies to keep on operating all of these different artillery pieces. They do require different kinds of ammo for each. Of course, they all can't use a 120mm shell. This one's using a 60mm shell or a 61mm shell, and so it is a bit of a logistical challenge to make sure that you can get all of these different kinds of ammunitions to the exact places they're needed at the right time to make sure that none of these units run out of ammunition. So hopefully they can continue to tackle and win that logistical challenge, because that is certainly helping them to hold the line and also push their counterattacks that they've been successful in over the previous few days. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see what I was talking about just a second ago, as a Ukrainian Su-27 was seen in the skies today. Now, ignore the caption. I don't know what they're talking about, but still, this is a wonderful video to see. Right here is a Ukrainian Su-27 flying above the battlefield. It's a beautiful video to see, knowing that Ukrainian aircraft are now able to operate over frontline airspace without the risk of being shot down. This is, of course, going to help out the Ukrainians a large deal, as air support is critically important in a modern war, and is what pretty much won World War II for the Allied powers, was just the air power they were able to field alone. That and the atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but that's for another time. But it's still wonderful to see that the Su-27s have returned to the skies, and I bet the Ukrainian pilots have been itching to get back at the Russians any way they can, much like the rest of the Ukrainians all around the country. We're now going to move on to the next video, where we can see a Ukrainian Mi-8/17 launching rockets. Every single time I show an Mi-8 style helicopter, I always put the disclaimer that it could also be an Mi-17, because to me, the Mi-8 and the Mi-17 are discernible from each other, and so I always want to give the disclaimer that it could be either one. But here we can see the footage from inside the helicopter, and of course I have to mute it because it has copyrighted music. But we can see the footage from behind the pilot of it flying pretty low to the ground. It, of course, will do its usual strategy of tilting up and then firing the rockets towards its target. We can now see it tilting up. And we can now see the rockets on their way. The helicopter is now trying to hit the deck as fast as possible. As we've seen, it's tilted its, I guess you could say, angle of attack incredibly low, and it's going to try and get as low to the ground as possible. Hopefully those rockets are on target and they hit exactly what they were aiming for. And so we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, and our final bit for this section, where we can see a pretty sick Ukrainian sniper setup. Now, this is one of the most interesting ones I've seen so far. It is out in the open, but they did try their best And we can see that they have two impressive sniper rifles right here. I have to say, they did a pretty good job Cerakoting them pretty much. That's what I would call it. Of course, it's the paint job on the gun. I'm not exactly sure if that is the correct term for it, but that's what I've heard before. And we can also see that they have silencers on. Now, there's a huge fight in the comments every single time I say suppressor. It's not a suppressor, it's a silencer. I've heard it called both. So I'm going to call it a silencer just because. But here we can see two sniper rifles, both with silencers. Both incredibly nice looking, actually. And we can now see the spotter with the sniper, as the sniper appears to be fiddling with the bipod. The video ends right there, and it's very interesting to see Ukrainian sniper team in action. I'm not really sure where they are or what they're doing, and of course I wouldn't say where they are because that would be giving away the sniper team. So hopefully they have an incredibly successful run, and they're able to instill terror in the Russian units, and maybe help to create a few more desertions or surrenders. We're now going to move on from the location unknown news towards the Harkeev area. But before we actually get to Harkeev and start reporting the news from there, we're actually going to take a look at the donations that have come through, recognize some of our largest donors for the night, and also answer a few questions before we move on to Harkeev. And so, with that, Matthew, what do we got?
Okay, so hello everybody, it's Enforcer Matt. So we are sitting at $3,700 on the fundraiser of the night, and our charity, for all of you that have been asking, is UNHCR. So these people help Ukraine directly. So every donation that you put in helps people on the ground in Ukraine. So we do want to recognize some of our top donors here, and I have them ready. Please bear with me, the list is getting quite long. We have a $200 donation from Thomas Simmer, a $150 donation from Will Riley, also known as Dick Cheney. We also have several $110 donations. We have one from KIMD. We have one from Jim Marshall, Brian Cave, Vern, Tim B, and also Alex Papadopoulos, Louis Francois Lapointe, Rust and Rot. And then we have a $100 donation from a guy called The Enforcer, a $100 donation from Serenette Brenz, and then we have several $50 donations, and I'm going to list them off real quick. We have one from Kubato King, Juju Harvey, John Petrie, Chris Mack, Ashley Hope, and Raz Taz. Thank you very much to all of our top donors of the night. And also, if I haven't called your name out and you put in a smaller donation, you are also appreciated as equally because every single donation adds up and eventually helps everybody on the ground in Ukraine. So don't feel discouraged if you're putting in a smaller amount of money. Every little bit helps, and they all add up in the end. So Enforcer, whenever you're ready, I do have some questions for you.
All right. And once again, I would like to thank some of our top donors like Will Riley for sending in the huge amounts of support. It does help out Ukraine so much. And of course, I would like to give my usual disclaimer. I haven't given it tonight, and just in case we do have a couple of new viewers, this fundraiser is run through the YouTube Give program, which is pretty much set up where not a single dime, and I want to make that clear, not a single dime touches any of our accounts whatsoever. This is moved straight from y'all to the fundraiser that this is specifically set out for, and then YouTube will send that straight to the nonprofit. So this is the only way I run fundraisers. I don't do anything else because I want to make sure that everyone knows that it's safe and that it is verified by YouTube. Of course, YouTube also covers 100% of the fees and sends the exact amount y'all donate to the nonprofit of our choice. So once again,
Enforcer.
Oh, wait, I just saw it. Naria is here, everyone. Let's give a big thank you to Naria. It's just dropped in $2,000 for the support for tonight's fundraiser. And I have to say, thank you so much, Naria. I just saw you right then, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're here. So welcome back, and thank you so much for the support. Naria always comes in clutch, and I hope that encourages all of y'all to give a little bit of extra support. Every bit of support helps, and tonight we have a $20,000 goal. Just for y'all to know, when Funker 530 comes on and Operator Starsky comes on, once again, the Lee Spring Army has to win. The Lee Spring Army never fails, and I know that if we all come together, along with a little bit of support from Operator Starsky and Funker 530, we are going to reach the moon. And so that fundraiser I'm eyeballing to be one of our largest fundraisers in terms of support. And I also want to bring up to everyone, of course, the wonderful history of our fundraisers, not to go on too long about it, but we did raise $53,000 on our last fundraiser for Doctors Without Borders. And I have to say, it was the most impressive thing that I've ever seen, and now we've got all of the support flowing in for Naria, which of course I think is well-deserved. If anyone's done a large amount of help for Ukraine, it is certainly them. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the questions.
And real quick, we're almost at $6,000. Narya came in and boosted it up quite a bit. And thank you very much, Narya. Very generous of you. And we're very close to 6,000. We have a pretty lofty goal again tonight of 20,000, but I doubted the Leaf Spring Army once before, and we ended up hitting 50,000. So never again doubt the Leaf Spring Army. So I have faith that we can get to that number. So up first for our questions, we have one from Woody Stems, who says, recently TE compared Russian invasion tactics in Ukraine with other conflicts. How do they compare with Israel's armor, artillery, and aircraft invasion of Lebanon?
I would say that the Russians don't really compare to the Israelis in any way, in any conflict. Just for everyone to know, Israel has been undefeated in every single war it's engaged in. The Israeli War of Independence comes to mind, and of course, not to toot Israel's whistle, or anything, but they have won every single war they've engaged in with every single country surrounding them. During the Israeli War of Independence, Israel was actually attacked by every single country surrounding them. That included Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and back then, the Israelis were a brand new country. Most of the Jews that live there today had just arrived there, and this land had pretty much been mandated beforehand for the Palestinians, which are, of course, the Muslim group that claims ownership of this land. And due to the Holocaust, it was politically looked at as important by the British to actually revoke pretty much the charter they had given to the Palestinians, and then give it to the Jewish Israelis, who then moved into the land. This pissed off all of the Muslims in the area because Jerusalem is considered the holy city for the Islamic faith, the Christians, and also the Jews as well. And so there's a large amount of people who want to claim Jerusalem for their religion. And so when the Israelis arrived, the Jewish Israelis arrived, this pissed off every single Muslim country surrounding them. And because of that, in 1949, pretty much everyone went to war with them. In fact, I forgot who it was, but it was I think it was a guy who was a sultan at the time. I'm not really sure if it was Nazar. I think I'm getting his name correct, the Egyptian dictator at the time. But someone said at that time they were going to make the Holocaust look like a joke compared to what they were going to do to the Israelis for, getting that land. So the war began, and the Israelis, to sum it up, over the course of a few months, actually beat every single country that went to war with them. And then after that, over the course of the 6 Days War, the Yom Kippur War, and a dozen others, they continue to just slaughter the countries around them. And so I wouldn't find it fair, honestly, to compare the Russian military, their tactics, and their progress with the Israelis, considering that the Israelis, at least as far as their record goes, have a spotless one with no defeats whatsoever. Of course, there's always a day that every single country is defeated, but still, Israel has not been defeated yet, and so I don't really want to compare the two because it's just not a fair comparison, honestly. But I do thank you very much for the question. I hope that does answer it and give a little bit of context about the success that the Israelis have had for a very decent amount of time. And I have to say that regardless of how people think about Israel, because of course Israel is a very contended topic these days. Please don't start a battle in the chat about that. But the Israelis have a spotless military record, and I would say one of the best kept in the Middle East. And, the argument about why it's that way, that's another story. But still, they have an incredibly impressive military. So thank you once again for the question. I hope that does answer it. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And real quick, I just want to mention that we're sitting at 6.5 thousand on our fundraiser at the moment. And let me recognize two more top donors we have here. $100 donation from Scott and a $50 donation from William Allen. Thank you very much to both of you, and thank you to everyone else who has contributed both anonymously and in a smaller amount. So up next we have a viewer, WF2U, who says that he believes he figures out the Morse code. He thinks it says, Ukraine will never yield to the Russian hordes, Harkeev is ours, and onwards to victory. And he says, I'm a former intercept analyst, and Morse code in several languages is in my blood.
Well, everyone, I have to confirm that he got it right. That is a message that I actually put in that Morse code, and I'm actually switching it out every single time we get someone who can guess it correctly. So, considering that you're actually a a little bit experienced in deciphering Morse code messages, I'm going to have to make it a little bit more difficult for you and a little bit more difficult for everyone else as well. We're actually going to add a cipher to this next time the message is put up, so that way everyone can have a little bit more fun trying to figure out what it says. Of course, it's usually just a random message like that one, but I still feel like it carries a little bit of weight, and it's, of course, a fun little endeavor to try and go through and decipher the thing. So, just for everyone to know here, since a lot of y'all are watching right now, that Morse code actually does have a message in it. It's not a random jumble of letters and stuff like that. I actually write out a message each time, input it into a Morse code translator, and then get the message and put it onto the stream. So it does change. So keep an eye out and join early in the stream if you would like to hear the Morse code message when the sirens are sounding and try and decipher it yourself. So, with that, congratulations so much for finding out what it means. That's really cool that people actually are able to understand the Morse code I put up. And with that, we're moving on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to return to the Harkeev news and the Donbass news.
And up next, we have a question from Matthias Vertanen, who says, Enforcer, while it is extremely unlikely, but since it's been in the news a lot, what do you think would happen if Russia went fully insane and started another war in Finland?
If the Russians went fully insane and started another war in Finland right now, there's nothing that would happen. It would be much like Ukraine, and there's really no extra sanctions that could be levied against the Russians as of now. We pretty much levied the heaviest sanctions possible against the Russians. So in terms of our economic cabinet of punishments that we could inflict against the Russians, we've run out. And so there's really nothing we could do if the Russians decided to attack Finland. They are not a member of NATO as of now, although they are going through the process of joining NATO along with Sweden. That's why we're calling Sweden and Finland's situation Swedland, so that way we can just cover them both in the same topic, since right now they're in the same basket trying to get into NATO. So to answer that question in brief, no, there's nothing that anyone could really do right now if Finland was attacked. We could, of course, provide them with support as well and monetary assistance. But beyond that, the Western world would not go to war as well if Finland was attacked. Although there may be a little bit of a difference if someone does come out within the next... Wait a minute, no, I'm sorry, correction. I'm completely misunderstanding that. I just remembered that the British have actually signed some kind of defensive agreement with the Finns, and so if the Finns get attacked, the British will get involved directly militarily. So I hope that does answer the question. I was actually mistaken there for a short amount of time. I don't think any other country has stepped in and signed any kind of defensive agreements with Finland, which is pretty much guaranteeing their independence. I haven't heard about anyone else rather than Britain, and so right now, the British would be the only ones to get involved if Finland was to be invaded. And also another important thing to remember is that just because the British have signed a defensive agreement with Finland does not mean that if Britain was to join that war, that the rest of NATO would go with them. Article 5 only pertains to NATO countries that get attacked. Finland, if it was attacked, is not a NATO country, and Britain would not be attacked as well. They would actually be joining in the war kind of like preemptively before they were attacked. So Article 5 wouldn't be invoked, and the rest of NATO would probably not join Britain in their defense of Finland, or they may. Who knows? You would just have to see how the political situation unfolds then. Also, real quick, I wanted to address something from the comments because I found this one to be very interesting, and it's from Marvelous Software, and he said that Israel actually lost the Yom Kippur War. And before we actually move on to the next bit of news here in the Harkeev area and Donbass region, I would like to cover that no, the Israelis did not lose the Yom Kippur War. One has to remember that when they started off in that war, they actually didn't control the Sinai Peninsula in any way, shape, or form. Israel has maintained the same borders that they've had since 1949, minus the Golan Heights. That's the only area I would say they kind of sort of control these days that they didn't control in 1949, and that was due to another war. I forgot the exact name of it. I believe it was the Six-Day War. I'm not exactly sure. But still, the Yom Kippur War, if I remember correctly, the Israelis... No. I think that was the Suez Crisis, actually. Hang on, let me pull that up. Suez Crisis. I know this is not Israeli... well, this isn't pertinent to Ukraine or anything, but it's still an interesting little endeavor into history, and I think that it would be neat to look at. Suez Crisis. Let me make sure this is the one I'm thinking about, because I remember that the Israelis made it all the way to the Suez Canal during the Suez Crisis, and then because of some dealings with the United Nations, NATO, and also the United States saying that France and Britain would face punishment for helping out the Israelis in this war, I believe that was the cause, but let me make sure. Yes, Here it is right here. Here's the map showing the Israelis pretty much taking the entire, good lord, how in the world did I forget the name of this? The Sinai Peninsula. It's right here on the map, too. Them taking the Sinai Peninsula, and then also the British and the French hopped into this war and started helping out the Israelis a large deal. It was a very interesting conflict, actually, that was just so cool historically, because the Israelis are never really supposed to win their wars, but due to an incredible amount of planning and perfect timing, they're always able to win their wars for the most part and pull through, even when the numbers are stacked against them, much like we're seeing in Ukraine right now. So in terms of that, they actually did not have the Sinai Peninsula originally, and they would have kept it if it wasn't for the external international political dealings where everyone pretty much told Israel, you're going to give them back the Sinai or else we're going to do something to you, and then they gave it back. So I think that's an important thing to remember, but that was still a little interesting topic to go over. And so with that, we have reached the end of this question segment. We're not going to cover Israel again. It's, of course, a very interesting military history, sure, but we're here for the Ukraine war, so we're going to go back to that. And with that, we've reached the end of this question segment. We will once again recognize some of our largest supporters. Remember, we are running a fundraiser, everyone, so make sure to give a large amount of support to the UNHCR, which is helping out loads of Ukrainian refugees. I have already helped them out. I put in $100 of my own money, and remember, $110 provides a Ukrainian refugee family with exactly 1 month of basic necessities. So keep that in mind, everyone, if you would like to support the perfect amount to support a whole entire refugee family. And with that, we're going to now return back to the news. Here in Harkeev today, we've seen and heard some reports that have been very interesting to me. Starting off this area, I haven't put down a marker for this, but the Ukrainians have confirmed that all of the Russian units within this area have retreated out of this pocket. So you're wondering, how is this pocket still existing? The Ukrainians backed up their report by saying, based off of the evidence, satellite footage, and the reconnaissance, the only troops left in this area are the DPR and LPR troops that have been threatened with being shot if they try and retreat into Russia. So that's the only reason this area of land is being held. Once those DPR and LPR units collapse, and we're not even sure if they're getting supplies from the Russians, so it may be very well the case that they'll collapse incredibly soon, there will be a large amount of prisoners most likely taken, and this whole entire pocket here will collapse west of the Donetsk, and Harkeev will no longer be under the direct threat of becoming an actual front line ever again. So with that, we can now see a Russian vehicle being hit in this area. I guess it'd be more accurate to say it's most likely a pro-Russian vehicle, most likely from the DPR LPR. And of course, I have to mute it. But we can see here the vehicles in the tree line. And we can now see them being hit by the artillery. I don't know if this is an M777 that's bringing in this fire, but whatever kind of artillery it is, of course, in the usual Ukrainian fashion, dead on. I think if we were still in the era of medieval mercenaries, much like the Langsnecks and the Swiss mercenaries of their time were hailed for their bravery in combat and also their ability to carry on a fight, I think that Ukrainian artillery would most likely become one of the most highly sought-after mercenary units in the world, considering the dead-on accuracy they've been able to achieve every single time we see them on film. Here we can see the Ukrainian artillery now bombarding a Russian position, and we can see the Russians climb out of their foxhole, and it's like a clown car in there. Look at that. There's like dozens of them running out of that hole. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Like a whole platoon pretty much came running out of that hole. Anyways, we can now see them hitting this position dead on as well, and it looks like that fire got right into the barn, and it now looks like it's destroyed half of it, so I don't think that infantry unit got away safely. We can now see Russians running down the railroad tracks and leaving their vehicles behind as they're now being decimated by the Ukrainian artillery as well. So, of course, interesting video to see, and it does show you once again how the Russians react under fire. While Ukrainians duck for cover and they hold their ground, even with their own vehicles in risk of being hit, we never see the Russians doing the same. They're always bailing out of their vehicles, much like we saw then. And that may be because they're heavily demoralized DPR and LPR troops that are now having to hold this pocket because they have no choice, and their survival depends on how long they'll be able to hold this. Not saying that the Ukrainians will execute them if they surrender, obviously that's not the case, But still, their survival as free people and not prisoners of war is entirely reliant on how long they'll be able to hold this pocket, probably without any support from the Russians. We've now gotten news and video evidence today to confirm the Ministry of Defense report that came out a while ago showing that the Ukrainians have reached the Russian-Ukrainian border. This is a beautiful bit of film here today because we actually saw a Ukrainian unit walk all the way up to the Russian border, where it's marked clearly with a marker saying that you've reached the Russian-Ukrainian border, and put down a blue and yellow marker showing that the Ukrainians have once again reached the border. Here's the video. And I'm just going to let it play. It's impressive. And we get hear the Ukrainian commander give a speech once the marker was put down. So here's the video.
Всегда готовы.
You see this marker? I'm going to pause this right here. This marker as a historic moment. Right here in this one frame of a video that was taken today, we've now seen the Ukrainians literally do what was unthinkable, and they've now touched the Russian border again, not even in an area where the Russians have hypothetically withdrawn. The Russians are still fighting in this area, yet the Ukrainians have pushed them back so far, they have now touched the Russian border and are standing right on it. This is as historic a moment as the fall of the Berlin Wall. And we're probably never going to see anything like this again throughout the course of modern history, and I hope we don't. I hope this stays in the history books as one of those pictures and videos that will be remembered for all time.
Пане президенте, Верховний Головнокомандувач Збройними силами України, доповідаю. Сьогодні, 15 квітня, 227-й батальйон, 127-ї бригади.
Actually, I don't think y'all be able to see the speech to text at the bottom of the screen, and so I'm actually going to mute this real quick and read the speech from this commander for y'all. This will be a speech that will go down in history for sure, and so let me read it off to y'all so that way you can hear what this commander has to say. Mr. President, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, I report that today, on April 15th, the 227th Battalion of the 127th Territorial Defense Brigade of Ukraine went to the border in a separate line with the country occupier, Russian Federation. We have arrived, Mr. President. We are here. Here is a border guard with us. We have arrived, Mr. President. We are at the border. And that is the end of the video, and one of the most patriotic things that I've ever seen for Ukraine. That literally reminds me of when that officer hopped up when General Pershing's American Expeditionary Force had arrived in France in World War I, and he got up and said, Lafayette, we are here. This has the same energy. Mr. President, we are on the border. That is something amazing to me, and I think that it's impressive. And so, for my Ukrainian speakers and also to give homage to this commander and his unit, I'm now going to let his speech play without me reading over it and let y'all hear his voice as he delivers this triumphant news that the Ukrainian forces are now back on the border.
Пане президенте, Верховний Головнокомандувач Збройними силами України, доповідаю. Сьогодні 227-й батальйон 127-ї бригади територіальної оборони України вийшов на рубіж і кордон, на роздільну смугу з Російською Федерацією, з країною-окупантом. Ми дійшли, пане президент, ми тут. Ось з нами прикордонник. Передаємо йому знак за нашою спиною. Який знак прикордонника? 510-1. Пане президент, ми дійшли. Ми на кордоні.
It's impressive. I can't believe it, actually. And it's something, when you really see it on film, I'm incredibly proud of these Ukrainian soldiers. I'm sure that Starsky has heard this news, and when he comes on next stream, although this is going to be a week out from now, I'm going to ask him about this because I feel like every single Ukrainian on earth right now is proud to see a blue and yellow marker put back down on the border with Russia. It's really an impressive thing, a really beautiful thing actually, and I hope to see that the Ukrainians are able to do the same thing across the remainder of this pocket that still remains within pro-Russian hands. And so, we have now covered the news of what has occurred in the Harkeev region. It is looking up and up for the Ukrainians, and this was actually just a week after Zelensky said that the Harkeev area was looking rather difficult, and it looked like the Ukrainians were in a tough position. And we've seen that these Ukrainian forces have pulled through and done something that not even the president of Ukraine probably believes, and they have now reached the Russian border once more. We're now going to move down the front line, past Harkeev, past these brave and valiant soldiers who have done an unbelievable deed, and we're now going to move further down towards the Izium area. Of course, we have gotten no news of the forces in Izium pursuing any sort of new actions. We have not heard about that. So far from what we're able to collect, it seems like the forces in that area have largely stalled in the fighting, and it appears that they're trying to regroup or resupply. And meanwhile, while this is happening and both sides are kind of starting to enter into static positions in this area for the moment, we can see a drone being used near the Izium area by the Ukrainians and still inflicting damage on the Russian units there. Here we can see a bomblet being dropped onto a Russian main battle tank. It appears to be most likely a T-72, or I should say it was a T-72. We can see two of the crewmen running away from the tank. Looks like most of them were largely okay, because they're still standing and running. And I'm not sure about the third crew member. I'm not sure if he was inside of the tank and died, or if he was just out of frame, but he is nowhere to be seen in this video. We can now see another bomblet being dropped onto the Russian tank, and hitting it near the rear towards the engine bay. We can now see the drone, of course, surveying how much damage has been caused to this Russian tank, and we can now see some kind of minor explosion occur on the top side of the screen near one of the sides of the tank. Another bomblet is now being dropped again on this Russian tank, and this time it hits near the front glacis. It appears that the driver may still be inside of this tank because the tank is now moving, and so that may be where the third crew member was, is that he was inside of the driver's hatch the entire time. I don't think that driver got out of that okay. We can now see that the whole entire screen has appeared that this drone has just gone into the Twilight Zone because this tank blew up like a nuclear bomb. So I don't think the driver's efforts of getting the tank out of danger were fruitful, to say the least. The drone is now flying away, and you can tell that tank certainly did brew up in a massive explosion. It appears that that bomblet may have gone through a hatch, perhaps, on the top of the turret that was left open, or breached the top of the turret, and the actual charge itself shot downwards into the ammo carousel below the turret and caused it to go into a massive ammo detonation. Regardless, we know that that tank is no longer in operation and is in multiple pieces across the front. We're now going to move on from the Izium area because we have no more news from there. Right now, things have largely become static in the Izium area, even according to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense reports. We're now going to move further down the line towards the area of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, where we've been getting a little bit of concerning news, actually, about Russian advances and movements in this area. We actually do know at this point that the Russians have taken Rubizhne, and so I'm actually going to adjust this on stream so that way everyone can see that this is now the current front line. So I'm going to get rid of the area in yellow, which was actually laid out for people who may be new here quite some while ago, actually, because we actually believed for a long amount of time that this area in yellow was going to be the area of advance for Russian forces in their attempt to encircle Severodonetsk and Lysychansk and create a new Mariupol, per se. We're now going to adjust this front line as well, so that way we can make sure that it accounts for the capturing of Rubizhne. So we're going to move this here. And I'd also like y'all to know that Operator Starsky's unit, the one he is based with, is actually in the Rubizhne area and has been fighting for the city. They did have to retreat because the city has practically been destroyed at this point. There's really no defensible positions within it. And so They have now retreated outside of the area of Rubizhne, but this is starting to put the area around Severodonetsk into a tricky situation in a way, as now the question stands, will Ukrainian forces be able to defend as well as they have before? And here's one thing that we do have to note. The pontoon bridge that was destroyed in this area where the two BTGs were pretty much leveled was actually on this river here, the Severodonetsk River. And I believe, if I remember correctly, this is the exact same river up here. Let me make sure. Yes, the Severodonetsk River. And so this river actually continues through all of Ukraine, all the way down here to Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. The Russians are now pretty much stuck where they either have to push through the city of Severodonetsk or they have to push across this river. The problem with pushing across the river is that you either have to capture a bridge intact and it has to remain intact for forces of a sizable proportion to cross over this river, or you have to create pontoon bridge. So far, we've seen their pontoon bridge get obliterated, along with two BGGs that were trying to cross it, and now we can see the Ukrainians are ensuring that they will not have an easy time crossing anywhere on this river, as we've now seen them destroy a railroad bridge today, preemptively, to make sure that the Russians cannot capture it intact. And so here's the video of this railroad bridge over the Severodonetsk River being destroyed. A very good video to see, as we know that Russian forces will not be able to capture that bridge and use it to ferry infantry and armor across. That's one thing really that railroad bridges are used for that close to the front. Of course, just because it's a railroad bridge doesn't mean that only trains can use it. They can actually still use it like a normal bridge and drive armored personnel carriers, tanks, and trucks across it. For the large part, generally okay. Of course, a railroad bridge can hold a large amount of weight, considering that a locomotive is several thousand tons for the most part. So wonderful to see that the Ukrainians, of course, are thinking ahead and making sure that the Russians will not have an easy time pursuing their objectives near the Severodonetsk and Lysychansk area. Within the area of Severodonetsk itself, we've of course gotten a little bit more unfortunate news today, as the Russians have directly shelled the hospital within Severodonetsk itself. Here's the video. As of course, it's usual to see the Russians attacking hospitals with wounded civilians inside of it, or just largely civilian infrastructure as a whole. You would of course think that the Russians would make sure and take care to not directly target hospitals within any area of the front, but we've seen that that is one of their preferred targets of choice, and it's really sick and inhumane. Of course, it's a violation of the rules of war, and hopefully the commanders who carried out that attack, as well as the infantry who followed the orders, will be held accountable for their crimes. We're now going to move outside of the area of Severodonetsk, right on the front line, where we've seen a little bit of interesting, somewhat concerning, but not too much news. Today we've seen BMPTs, which are one of the newest armored fighting vehicles in the Russian armed forces, spotted in the area of Severodonetsk. Here in this clip, you can see them passing by. In my summary today, pausing it right here, I actually said I wasn't really sure if these were the T-14 BMPT Terminators or the T-72 variant of the BMPT Terminator. I actually was able to tell by looking at the video a little bit more that these are in fact the BMPT T-72 versions of the Terminator. So these have actually been around for about 20 years at this point. So they're new, but they're not that new. But for the Russians, this is like practically brand new stuff. Of course, the question is, how well will these actually be used? And the answer is not well at all. These are just pretty much a souped up BMP in terms of firepower, like a BMP-2M on a T-72 chassis. We know that T-72s get their turrets popped off like some sort of zit. And so I'm very sure that these BMPTs are not going to last too long on the front lines. And this is telling you that the Russians are desperate for new equipment and replenishments, because they're no longer using their standard run-of-the-mill stuff. They're starting to use their more lesser produced and more rare units in an attempt to fill the gaps in their armor that they're now facing. Of course, I'm going to let this video continue and let y'all see the BMPTs drive on by. You can actually see that they're joined by a T-72B3, it seems. We now see another BMPT Terminator and another one passing by. So far we've seen 3 of them. We can now see what appears to be a 4th one. I think the Russians are a little bit confused with their labeling of the BMPT Terminator. They're always labeling it as the present tense of Terminator, and I think the Ukrainians are going to make sure that that designation is actually past tensed and it becomes terminated. With that, we're now going to move further down the front, past the area of Severodonetsk, and more south towards the area of Harkeev, where today we've seen a TOS firing at Ukrainian troops. Of course, we've seen these videos here and there, but we haven't been seeing a large amount of them recently, at least video evidence of these vehicles being used. Here, in this one, we can see this, and at the very beginning, this man confirms that this is apparently a unit in the Luhansk army. Here's the video.
Доброе утро из Луганска. С майскими праздниками.
See the TOS firing. We can now see a second TOS being used by the LPR soldiers. Excuse me, everyone. We can now see this TOS firing as well. And with that, that is the end of the video. Of course, the TOS system is highly used by the Russians, although we haven't been seeing it used as of late. It appears that they're now starting to ramp up the uses, specifically for LPR troops, as they're desperately trying to make the breakthroughs of the front lines that they've been trying for about 2.5 weeks at this point. Of course, the only places that we've known where breakthroughs have occurred is near Liman, Rubizhne, and Popasna. There's been no breakthroughs anywhere else as far as we've been able to tell by the video evidence here on this channel. We're now going to move down to the area of Popasna, where we can once again see on footage today Ukrainian aircraft at work. It says near Izium, but I actually did a little bit of looking and researching, and we found out that this was most likely near Popasna, and so here's the video. We can now see the aircraft launching their rockets and also popping flares and hitting the deck immediately. And so it really looks like the Su-25s of the Ukrainian Air Force are also following the exact same tactics that the helicopters are committing to, which is staying incredibly low to the ground, tilting up to fire their inventory of weapons, and then hitting the deck immediately and flying off as fast as possible. It's of course a pretty decent strategy in making sure that ground anti-air fire cannot hit your aircraft, and of course is something that we see both sides using in combat. that is the end of the video. And of course, it is wonderful to see that we've had loads of videos coming out today of Ukrainian aircraft in action. This lets us know that the Ukrainian Air Force cannot be depleted entirely of aircraft, considering that we've seen so many flying examples as of today. We're now going to move down towards the Donetsk area of the Donbass, where I've been seeing a pretty interesting amount of news showing that, much like their, I guess, compatriots in the north, the LPR, the DPR is also trying to push their front lines as well, mostly with artillery. Here we can see DPR artillery raining down on Ukrainian troops on an infrared camera. This did occur about 15 hours ago on the 15th of May, which is today. So here's the video. Of course, we don't really get a lot of confirmation if Ukrainian forces are in this area, but we do see DPR artillery raining down on this village. We can now see the artillery exploding in the distance as the DPR, of course, desperately tries and is most likely failing to uproot the Ukrainian soldiers in that area and try and take the area for themselves. It appears that the artillery that is landing appears to be of a larger caliber, most likely in the 150 to 200 millimeter range, a little bit more, a little bit less, give or take, but it does appear to be sizable. As each shell lands and fails to uproot the Ukrainian defenders, we can see the Russian bots in the chat get more and more active. What's crazy to me is that we've actually enabled a lot of safeguards to ensure that these bots cannot come in here as easily and just say what they want, but we can still see that they actually subscribe to the channel now to get in here and try and air their garbage. I've always been wondering why every once in a while I see a subscriber leave or two, you know, like it'll be like at 58,756 and it'll go down to 755 for a second. I'm always like, what is that? And it's probably a bot that subscribed just to comment some garbage and then they're unsubscribing so that way they can leave. So interesting to see. And of course, if you do see a bot, make sure to add Matthew with the name of the bot so that way he can make sure to get rid of it. We're now going to move on further down the front towards the area of Pisky, where today we've seen the DNR versing Ukrainian troops directly. Here's the video of that engagement. This is, of course, taken by the DPR, so take it with a grain of salt. What they're showing may be, of course, an exaggeration.
Как-то крайне только что стреляли, как-то он странно дернулся опять. А нет, встал. Вон он. Стреляйте, стреляйте!
Ты с того угла, ты их не достанешь. Сядь вот там сверху, туда. Загнись туда сверху, пригнись, пригнись. Вот там сверху, займи позицию.
Смотри, чтоб ты знал, вот угол, понял? Вот это угол лежат.
Полен ты мне.
Вот он лежат, пидорасы. Давай.
Выполнить команду ураган.
Что мне можно посмотреть?
Принял.
Это вон, вот пятак.
We see the firefight is unfolding.
4, ой, 3 есть.
У меня еще
But we can't tell what is going on.
Доброе утро, Россия! Тащи трубу тоже. Гранатомет тоже тащи! Это ж эти 4 пидораса, блядь, нахуй.
And so, with that, of course, interesting footage, but we never saw the Ukrainian forces on film, although the DPR is claiming that they're directly going up against them here in this clip. Of course, we always have to give the disclaimer with Russian videos that this entire thing could be fake and staged, so just keep that in mind when watching that. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown, well, actually not location unknown news. some news from Marinka, where we can see that the DPR is using D-20 artillery pieces to hit Ukrainian positions. We see both sides using these artillery pieces. They're actually incredibly common in post-Soviet countries. And here in this clip, while I mute the video, we can see the DPR trying to hit Ukrainian troops with varying degrees of success. We now see the artillery landing around where the Ukrainian soldiers were, but it never hit directly onto the house. We now see Ukrainian troops hightailing it down a road. I mean, like, they are running at great speed, which is, of course, very smart to do in an open area. And we now see smoke from one of the shells and a second shell on the road hitting. We don't see the infantry anymore. I think they've now moved into this trench here on the clip. And so it doesn't look like the Ukrainian soldiers are actually taking any of this fire. In fact, it doesn't look like they're taking it at all. We can see some Ukrainian soldiers hunkered down here on the side of the road. And now we can actually see one of the artillery shells land directly onto those Ukrainian troops. Unfortunately, it looks like one of them was wounded. With that, that's the end of the video, but for the large part, it looks like most of the artillery landed off the mark of these Ukrainian units in the video, with only one shell landing directly onto them, and it looks like the soldier that was closest to the explosion was most likely only wounded, and hopefully can receive some medical care, and make sure that he will survive that injury, if he has one. Sorry, I just went through like a massive stutter there. And with that, we now have to revisit something of an overarching theme here in this war, and this is an incredibly important one to cover. The DPR and the LPR have been pretty much treated as Russia's pets. The Russians try and treat them nice, but at the end of the day, they can throw them in a ditch or put them in a haversack and throw them in a river. Now, that's something that some people said, no, the Russians care for the Russian-speaking people. That's what the bots would have you believe, at least. But as we can see here in the northern area around Harkeev, that's not the case. They actually threatened to shoot the DPR and LPR soldiers if they even stepped foot into Russia. And so now they're stuck in Ukraine without any help whatsoever. The news actually made it into the DPR. And now we can see the families of these soldiers gathering around and fighting with the DPR officials about the mobilization, and also their family, their pretty much like husbands, being sent to die in a war that the Russians don't even care about these people to fight for.
Нужно донести информацию, что наши резервники брошены. Российские войска уехали. Резервники брошены. Ну не завтра утром, сегодня. Девочки, отсылайте это все в интернет, вылаживайте в интернет все.
А как нам связаться с пасечником?
А вы можете? Может. Какое письмо?
А где нам написать письменное обращение?
В электронном виде, чтобы он сегодня. И сейчас отправили. Простите, вы сегодня ночью будете крепко спать, а мы будем под военкоматом сидеть. А мы будем стоять...
And as you can see there, it doesn't sound like the DPR citizens are happy about hearing the fate of their families. Well, they're pretty much husbands and wives sometimes that have been sent to fight in this war and are ending up dying for nothing, for a country that doesn't even care about those people. The people that Russia claims they're fighting for, and we can now see them threatening to kill them if they cross into Russia. So that's something interesting to note. With that, we've now reached the end of the Harkeev and Donbass news, but before we actually start moving on into the Southern Front news, we once again want to recognize some of the largest donors on this channel and answer a few questions as well. And so, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and we are currently sitting at $9,600 on the donations. So we were sort of stalled out there for a minute. Now we're sort of back up on progress now at 9,600, and we have had several large donations come in. So first up, we have a $330 donation from Sylvester the Cat. Thank you very much, Sylvester. And then we have a couple of 220 donations. We have one from Russell Wheeler, and we have one from Thomas Condon. And also we have a $140 donation from Not Von Bayern. And then we have two $100 donations. We have one from WL and one from Mac Del Castillo. And then several $50 donations. We have one from RCW93277, Nicholas, and then John Staley, and No Fear 4x4. Thank you to all of you for your support of Ukraine. And thank you to everybody else that's put in a donation as well. And with that being said, we're at 9,700 now. And I have some questions for you when you're ready, Enforcer.
All right, and before we move on to the questions, I of course want to thank everyone who sent in a huge amount of support on this fundraiser tonight. Of course, every single dollar helps, and I love to say that every single dollar helps, because some people may be thinking out there, "Ah, man, I've only got $5 to give her $1. What does that really do?" Here's the thing though, y'all. If 1,000 of y'all send in $1 a pop, that's an extra $1,000 that would not have been going to support Ukraine. So don't worry. If it's just $1 or $5, chipping in and doing any amount of help helps out a huge way, especially if a large amount of people do that. And we're trying to sit here and get as much help as possible to Ukraine, and I have to have y'all's help to do it. I can only put up so much before I start to, of course, start hemorrhaging on my account and become poor, and not be able to do anything or even eat. So, I've already chipped in my $100, and I would love for everyone to join me, of course, and chip in as much as possible. It's, of course, a massive help, and I know that all together as the Lee Spring Army, we can do a massive bit of good. One thing I would love to note is that every once in a while, I do see people in the comments saying, "I'm poor, I can't donate." That's fine. That's okay. But here's something else you can do. If you would like to help out any way you can, but you can't help out through the donations, you can always hit the like on this video. Liking this video does help it to reach more people, and if you help it to reach more people, some of those people may be able to help out this fundraiser, and in a way, you will have pretty much supported it. So make sure to hit the like button if you can't support the fundraiser through a donation, and if you can support it through a donation, that's of course a huge amount of help. Hopefully we can reach $10,000 here before we reach the end of this question segment, because I would be more than proud to know that the Lee Spring Army is always kicking and fighting, and we're always doing everything we can to give as much support as possible. And so with that, I thank you all once again so much for the support, and also helping out this fundraiser a lot. It does mean a big deal. And with that, we're going to move on to the questions.
And first up on our questions, we have one from Buck Anon, who says, "Enforcer, as Hitler was in denial until the opposition knocked on his door, do you suspect that Putin will be in denial even when Ukraine has encircled Moscow?"
I think that Ukraine would never encircle Moscow, but I think that Putin would be in disbelief if the Ukrainians actually pushed the Russians out of all occupied territory, including Crimea. I think he would just never accept it, but that's something that you have to learn to accept really quickly, or otherwise the Ukrainians may have to start pushing inside of Russia to try and end this war, and then of course that could turn nasty as the Russians do have a nuclear arsenal. So I hope that does answer the question, and I do thank you so much for asking. It is, of course, an interesting question, and I do believe that Putin is as delusional as Hitler in a way. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quick, I want to remind everybody that we aren't doing super chats tonight. So if you have a question, just tag me or the Enforcer, and I will put it in the queue, and we'll try to answer it before the stream ends tonight. So up next, we have a question from Wild Bill.
Wait a minute. Hang on. Before we move on, Matthew,
Yep.
We've just gotten a super chat from Michael Goebel of $220, which has just thrown us over the $10,000 mark. Michael Goebel, I want to thank you so much for the support. That kind of support does help out a long way in Ukraine, and that's also going to help provide 2 Ukrainian refugee families with the basic necessities for a month. So I thank you so much for the support. It is, of course, a big deal, and it does help them out a lot. And that's what we're all here for at the end of the day, and hopefully, by the end of the night, we can reach that $20,000 goal. And so with that, I thank you so much once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and back to the question from Wild Bill, who says, "What are the 3 cloth wraps around the base of Ukrainian mortar rounds?"
That weird cloth wrap. I'm not really sure how to explain it, but I believe it helps the round kind of fall down the barrel without jiggling around too much. I might be able to pull that up. What is that foam thing on a mortar round? What are the rings on mortar rounds for? It acts like a piston ring, ensuring no gas leakage during firing, and maintains the bomb centrally in the barrel, increasing accuracy. So I was partially right, although there is a secondary reason for it. Apparently it's much like a paper wad, I guess you could say, for a musket ball, as in the paper wad makes sure that all of the force of that black powder charge doesn't escape around the actual ball and actually pushes it out with all of the force possible. Also, those little rings help the round to stay stabilized as it falls down the barrel and help increase the accuracy. So I was kind of right there, but I also didn't mention that first part. So I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to one more question, and then we're going to go to the Southern Front news, the speech from President Zelensky, and then try and garner as much support as we can for this fundraiser. We are halfway there, y'all, and I would sing halfway there, but I don't sing all too well, and honestly, it would get copyrighted. So with that, we're going to move on to one more question, and then we're going to return to the Southern Front news.
So our next question is from Ruslan Dukovsky, who says, Enforcer, hey guys, I'm a resident of Kupiansk. When do you think we will start liberating it? And thanks for your support. We all appreciate it.
Well, I thank you very much for enjoying what we do on this channel. Of course, we try and report the news as best as possible to let Ukrainians know what's going on if the news is hard for them to find, and also let people around the world know what's going on. This is one of the most popular streams, I believe, on YouTube for the war in Ukraine, and I'm highly honored that a lot of people find this news to be good enough that they do return to hear it every day. To answer that question, I'm not really sure. Could you re-spell the name of that town for me real quick, Matthew, so I can pull it up?
So you said Kupiansk, so Kupyansk.
Kupiansk. Let's take a look at that town specifically. Where is it? It is north of Izium on the Oskol River. So let's go there. Kupiansk. I, of course, don't want to say how the Ukrainians could manage to take Kupiansk, but I do believe that it is something possible. I'm not really sure when we would see that, but I feel like we would see that in under 2 months' time. So I hope that answers the question, and I do thank you very much for asking it, and it's wonderful to hear that we actually do have some Ukrainians here in our chat, and of course they like to hear this news as well. Of course, it's an honor to know that Ukrainians also listen in on this news to get their information about what's going on, and I hope that it is valuable and accurate. So with that, I thank you so much for asking the question, and it's wonderful to hear that we do have Ukrainian viewers here that do enjoy this news. With that, we're now going to move on past the Donbass area and into the Mariupol and the Southern Front as a whole. And so, we will once again get back to everyone's questions, and I hope, and let's set this goal, everyone, let's reach $15,000 by the end of President Zelensky's speech at the end of this news segment. I know we can do it. We've been able to do a load of stuff so far. Nothing has ever been out of our reach, and I know that we can reach 20,000 by the end of the night. I've already chipped in my $100, so once again, remember everyone, we can all do a little bit of help. If we just chip in as much as we can help to achieve the goals that we're looking for, which is supporting Ukraine as much as possible. With that, we're now going to go into Mariupol. Today, there's been a decent amount of news, as the first thing we've seen is that the Russians are now committing war crimes once again, as video evidence has emerged today that the Russians are using some kind of incendiary rounds on the Ukrainians. In this video, they say it's white phosphorus. In another video, I saw them call it magnesium. I'm not exactly sure what kind of charge it is, but we do know that it is some kind of incendiary charge. And so, here's the video. It does look a lot like a white phosphorus explosion. That's what this actually looks like. But then again, it may be magnesium. I'm not entirely sure. But we can see the rounds raining down on this area of the factory. And white phosphorus burns for an incredibly long amount of time, and it'll burn through pretty much everything on a person. It'll burn through their clothes, it'll burn through their skin, all the way down to the bone. It's a very sick thing to use, and of course, is being used on combatants. One thing that is interesting to note, though, is that while this is sickening and immoral in a way, I do have to make it clear that in the way it's being used right here, if all the civilians have been evacuated out of the Azovstal, surprisingly as sick as this is to see, this actually isn't a war crime, and let me explain how. There is no provision in the rules of war, the Geneva Convention, if you'd like to call it that, that says that you can't use incendiary rounds on combatants. There's a specific rule saying you cannot use incendiary rounds on civilian populations or civilian centers, but right now we know, according to our information, that all of the civilians have been evacuated out of the Azovstal, so there's no one there anymore rather than those soldiers. And so this phosphorus being used on them is surprisingly actually legal and is actually not breaking any rules of war in the process of doing so. I think that that should be changed. When you think about incendiary rounds being used on a person and something being able to burn through their flesh all the way down to their bones and also burn through their bones as well, that seems incredibly inhumane. And so I hope that in the future, the rules of war / the Geneva Convention are adapted to where incendiary rounds are completely outlawed, much like chemical warfare was outlawed a long time ago. And so hopefully, of course, that will change, but right here we once again saw a sickening and deplorable attack by the Russians using a very immoral munition. We're now going to move on to the next clip of news that we've gotten from the area today, where we can see an Azov soldier singing Stefania. You may actually know this from a large amount of the music used in Ukrainian clips. If I did unmute them, you would hear this a pretty good bit, and you can see the soldier here singing it.
Стефанія, мамо, мамо, Стефанія, розквітає поле, а вона сивіє. Заспівай мені, мамо, колискову, хочу ще почути твоє рідне слово.
That's the end of the video. Of course, it sounds like he's trying to keep up a little bit of morale, and of course, it's a wonderful thing to try and make sure that every single soldier keeps up their morale any way possible. You can actually hear explosions ringing off in the background, and I do have to say that this man looks a little pale, and he looks a little, I guess you could say, famished. I guess that would be the correct good term to use. It looks like this man in particular hasn't been eating too well, and they continue to go through the suffering every single day to defend this plant, and that's something heroic in its own right, that they're willing to go through this much suffering to keep doing what they're doing. We're now going to move on to the last bit of news we've gotten today from the Azovstal, where we can see a fight occurring for the slag dump on the eastern side of the plant. Here you can see the slag dump, and so here's the video. This is, of course, taken by pro-Russian forces, and so take its recounting of the story with a grain of salt. It's probably got a lot of artistic liberties in it, but here's the video. Of course, I'll have to mute it just in case of its copyrighted music.
С целью надежно заблокировать украинских националистов на территории завода «Азовсталь» силами батальона специальных действий, подразделений 9-го полка народной милиции ДНР, подразделений 810-й бригады морской пехоты Черноморского флота Вооруженных сил Российской Федерации и подразделений других силовых структур республики был осуществлен штурм лодочной станции и шлакового отвала на территории завода «Азовсталь» в городе Мариуполь. В ходе боя националисты полка Азов были выбиты с территории лодочной станции. Под постоянным огневым воздействием были вынуждены бросить свои позиции и занять рубеж обороны на вершине шлакового отвала. Благодаря решительным и умелым действиям бойцов народной милиции ДНР и вооруженных сил Российской Федерации противник был разбит и бежал вглубь территории завода.
Just gonna mute that through there so that way hopefully don't get copyright striked, although that's probably already happened. I'm just gonna let it play. If I get copyrighted, oh well. As you can see, artillery explosions ringing all around the Azovstal, as it appears that Russian troops are now moving around the perimeter. Or Ukrainian, I'm not exactly sure which is which right now. You now see explosions ringing out all over the slag heap. which is of course the Azovstal high ground. Whoever controls the slag heap actually controls an area that looks straight down into the plant. As you can see, more activity. It appears that some kind of BTR is over there in the shoreline. Honestly, I'm going to cut the video. I'm going to be honest with y'all, this is pretty lame. We're not really seeing a lot. The footage is really ambiguous as to what's really going on rather than the occasional explosion here and there. And while I do show Russian footage whenever I can find any, most of the time it's lame. Thank God most of it's short, like a minute or two long. But this is like 5 minutes long. And I'm not going to sit here and subject all of y'all to that torture of watching this lame stuff for 5 minutes, which is pretty much just spoon-fed Russian propaganda. So we're now going to move on from that video and out of the Azovstal area in general. Hopefully the Azov can continue to hold on to the area and, of course, inflict massive losses on the Russian attacking forces, which continue to breach the defensive perimeter and hope to eventually destroy the Azov, although that doesn't appear to be an easy task for as far as anyone's concerned. We're now going to move out of the Mariupol area, and we're now going to start moving further down the front to the front line south of Zaporizhzhia. Just, I believe, 20 miles south of Zaporizhzhia. Let me make sure. Yeah, just about 20 miles south of Zaporizhzhia today, we can see that the 59th has been hitting Russian vehicles once again. The 59th Motorized Brigade has been inflicting massive amounts of Russian losses over the past few weeks in this specific area. We can, of course, see artillery raining down. Of course, it does have copyrighted music. And we can see it raining down directly onto the Russian units. This spread does appear to be a little less accurate, although the fire is now becoming a little bit more accurate and starting to hit closer to the road and the tree line, where we can obviously see some Russian vehicles alongside. We can now see one of the vehicles get hit and start brewing up. And now at the end of the video, it appears that we can see the sunset. And of course, impressive and wonderful to see that the Ukrainian 59th Motorized Brigade continues to inflict massive losses on the Russian units south of Zaporizhzhia. In this next clip, we can once again see the 54th Motorized Brigade, which is also in the area, taking out a Russian tank with a javelin. Of course, an interesting clip, and it will have to be muted. Here's the video of the Ukrainian soldiers sitting down with his javelin, just enjoying a nice day, and then he fires the missile. The javelin missile has now been fired, climbs up above the tank, and then it appears that in this footage there was a drone looking at it from the side, which hit the tank dead on, now leading to an ammo detonation. It appears that the turret took a vacation, it got some travel miles with Delta Airlines, and so hopefully we can see more tanks getting a little bit of travel miles with Delta Airlines. I guess you could call it flight time, and so with that, we can see that the Russian losses are still mounting south of Zaporizhzhia, and we've heard of no progress in terms of Russian advances here on this part of the line. We're now going to move towards the area of Kersan, where today we've seen in the Kryvyi Rih pocket, which is a brand new addition on this map, the 28th Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces were hitting Russian units. Here we can see in this clip some kind of small valley in the middle of some farm fields where Russian units have been hiding. We can now see the artillery raining down right on top of them onto this large unit of vehicles that has been compiled into one small area of this road, and we can already see that one of them has been hit and has begun to burn. We can now see the drone looking into a field, which is interesting. We'll skip forward past that part. Wait a minute. I think this may be a slideshow. Hang on. Let's fast forward to the field. Maybe this is a problem with the video. Let me skip forward. Okay, apparently it was some kind of problem with the video. We can now see another artillery explosion ring out in the very same area that the first one hit, and we can now see smoke billowing out of that area of the ravine, showing that a Russian tank or vehicle may have been hit within that area. We can now see the Russians running for the hills as every single tanker in this area has now fled their vehicle and is now climbing out of the valley. With that, that is the end of the video, and we can see that the Ukrainians are inflicting large losses on the Russian units in this area in particular, near the Kryvyi Rih, I guess you could call salient, and so hopefully the Ukrainians can continue to inflict large amounts of losses on the Russian armor, and hopefully push them out of the western area of the Donetsk River. Well, actually, the Dnipro River, correction. We're now going to move to the area around Odessa, where today we've seen something that you would believe is straight out of a movie in how a mine looks like. Here we can see the sappers, Ukrainian sappers, defusing a sea mine, apparently planted by the Russians, that is now washed up on shore. We can now see them, of course, trying to carefully defuse the mine.
Сейчас поделюсь мыслью. Где ключ?
We can now see them unscrewing a piece of the mine and now digging a hole in the sand. They are now moving the mine by ropes to this hole to detonate it. And so it looks like the sappers got a free vacation at the beach, and they also got to do the best thing that they like in their job, which is, of course, blowing up bombs. It was a wonderful thing to see, and I'm happy to know that the Ukrainian sappers did manage to defuse that mine safely. With that, we're now going to move on past the international news. Unfortunately, we don't have any today, and we're now going to move to the speech from President Zelensky. Once again, I'm going to ask that everyone rally and try and get as much support as possible for the fundraiser. We are at $11,000 right now, and there is only $9,000 left to reach the $20,000 goal of the night to help out the UNHCR. So once again, make sure to give as much support as possible because it does help out an incredibly large amount. With that, here's the speech from President Zelensky.
Ukraine.
I'm of course going to start it from the beginning and not interrupt. So here's the video.
Українці, українки, усі наші захисники і захисниці, завершується 81-й день нашої оборони і починається ще один тиждень цілодобової роботи на Україну і на перемогу. Цього тижня буде, як і завжди, багато міжнародної активності, в якій я братиму участь. Ключове – зброя і фінансова підтримка для України. Фінанси не тільки для того, щоб зберігати стабільність зараз, але й щоб вже розпочинати відбудову зруйнованого Росією. Також працюємо для посилення санкцій проти Росії. Потрібно, щоб партнери щотижнево ухвалювали рішення, які обмежують зв'язки Росії зі світом. Окупанти мають відчувати підвищення ціни війни, для них відчувати постійно. Зараз першочергове – це нафтове ембарго. Якби в Москві не намагалися зірвати це рішення, час залежності Європи від російських енергоресурсів закінчується. І це не змінити. Ще одне завдання, яке набуває тим більшого значення, чим довше триває війна, робимо все, щоб зберігати максимальну увагу світу до нас, до України. Інформація про наші потреби має бути в новинах усіх держав, які важливі для нас. Має бути там постійно і кожного дня. Зокрема, для цього, для більшої інформаційної і політичної підтримки України, вже у понеділок буду спілкуватися зі студентами провідних американських університетів. Це 63 університети США і 2 університети Канади, які об'єднують сотні тисяч студентів і є великою експертною та дослідницькою спільнотою. Їхній голос точно посилить наші можливості. Також заплановано і окреме звернення до студентів Стенфордського університету наприкінці травня. Готуються також до спілкування з українськими студентами провідних вузів нашої держави. У своєму зверненні до них відповів на важливі деякі складні питання, які вже є у нашому суспільстві, які вже видно, і очікую глибоких запитань від них, від наших студентів. Обов'язково продовжу звертатись до парламентів європейських держав-партнерів України. Наше завдання – це статус кандидата в члени Євросоюзу для України, а згодом вступ до Євросоюзу за швидкою процедурою. Кожна держава має значення, кожен голос важливий. Не менш важливо і мати максимальну згоду європейських країн посилювати санкції проти Росії. Саме для цього найближчим часом буду звертатись до парламенту Люксембургу. До речі, працюємо також і над тим, щоб розширити географію таких спеціальних виступів у парламентах на країни Африки та Азії. На 23 травня заплановано звернення до учасників форуму в Давосі. Цьогоріч конференція буде особливо важливою для нашої країни. Буде обговорюватись післявоєнне відновлення. Робимо все, щоб по максимуму зібрати підтримку світу, і участь в роботі Давоського форуму є однією з найкращих можливостей саме для цього. Продовжуємо дуже складні і делікатні переговори, щоб врятувати наших людей з Маріуполя, з Азовсталі. Цим питанням займаємося щоденно і головне, щоб домовленості виконувалися. Очікуємо ухвалення Сполученими Штатами Америки важливих рішень для нашої держави, нового суттєвого пакету підтримки і детального опрацювання поновленої історичної програми Ленд-лізу. Готуємось до нових намагань Росії наступати на Донбасі, якось активізувати свій рух на півдні України. Окупанти досі не хочуть визнавати, що знаходяться в глухому куті і що їхня так звана спецоперація вже збанкрутувала. Але обов'язково настане момент, коли український народ дотисне загарбників до повного визнання ними реальності. Що вони не креативили в Херсоні, в Мелітополі, якби не зображали свою нібито владу в окупованих районах Приазов'я та Донбасу, їхнє перебування там все одно тимчасово. Там все одно будуть український прапор, український закон, українське життя. Сьогоднішні російські ракетні удари по Львівській області, обстріли Гуляйполя, Сєвєродонецька, Лисичанська, міст і громад Донецької області. Вся ця жорстокість окупантів, яку Україна переживає щодня, призведе лише до того, що російські солдати, які виживуть, унесуть це зло із собою назад в Росію. Унесуть, бо відступатимуть. Ось чим завершиться уся горячкова активність російських військових, яку ми бачимо з вами зараз. І я вдячний усім українцям і українкам, які наближають цей час. Вічна слава усім, хто захищає нашу державу. Вічна пам'ять кожному, вічна пам'ять кожній, хто віддав своє життя за Україну. Слава Україні!
And with that, that was the speech from President Zelensky. Of course, another wonderful speech and the ending of another day of news here on day 81 of the war in Ukraine. We are only 9 days away now from being at the beginning of the 4th month of the war and rounding out the 3rd month. It's very impressive to think that the Ukrainians have held this long, and one can only assume that they will continue to hold on for much longer at the current rate they're going at. And so, with that, that concludes today's news segment. I once again highly suggest that everyone does stay around to make sure and help out this fundraiser and help us to get as far as we can with it. Of course, it is a huge deal to me and the Leaf Spring Army to get these fundraisers to their goal. We have a $20,000 goal tonight, and I know that even though we only have $8,000 left, we can make it there. We can all make it there as a massive group, and I ask once again that everyone rally and try and send in a load of support so that way we can get up to 15,000 here before the next 20 minutes, hopefully. And so, with that, who are our biggest donors tonight, Matthew? And we'll move on to some questions and just talk about the live chat in general.
Okay, so to recognize some of our top donors here, we have a $250 donation from D. Shaw, a $110 donation from Leaf Spring Army, Paolo Corradini, Lorraine Serwin, and then we have a $170 donation from Putin My Butt When, and then a $110 donation from Jess P, and a $50 donation from BC Skyman, among many others. Which unfortunately we couldn't list off all of them because we'd be here all night. But thank you very much for all of your help and assistance in the fundraiser, and it's very much appreciated and very generous of you all. So with that, that is our top donors for the moment.
And of course, I have to say, I thank you all so much. I just heard one really cool in Leaf Spring Army. I thank you so much for the support. And I also thank Paolo Corradini, who not only helps out this channel a large amount in helping us to keep on running, but he also helps out these fundraisers a massive deal as well. And so I'd like to thank you all both, and also everyone else who did support the fundraiser who was just mentioned, because y'all are doing a massive amount of support and help for Ukraine. And I'm sure that the Ukrainians who will be receiving the support are unbelievably grateful for it. You are literally helping them to survive, and so that is, I guess we could say, the best amount of help we could do as a whole. As this Leaf Spring Army, we are. So with that, we're about to move on into the questions, but before we do, I'm actually going to look through the live chat myself, because I saw a couple of things that I would like to talk about. Anthony Stark said Zelensky is a hero, Putin is a zero. I like that one, actually. I had to make sure to go back and find that. I like that one a lot. So thank you, Anthony Stark, for sharing that. Also seen someone say that Eurovision is a music contest. Now, I've also seen a lot of people ratting on Eurovision, saying it sounds like some kind of LASIK eye center. And I was thinking, don't you agree with that, Matthew? It kind of does sound like that.
Yeah, pretty close.
Well, anyways, moving on from that, we can see Chris Mack signing off. I'll see you around, Chris Mack. Hope you have a great night. And with that, we're going to now move on to the questions. And so what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and the first question we have is from King Mac, who says, Enforcer, Russia have lost about 50% of their forces in Ukraine and about 100,000 troops. I hope it's true. That seems really high, but where are these numbers coming from?
These numbers are coming from the compiled figures of wounded and killed. If a soldier is wounded, usually they're already discharged from the fighting. Usually they're sent to some kind of hospital and then, medically discharged. So that's based off of that figure. So far, we know that around 26 to 27,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, but the additional number, the additional 75,000, are coming from wounded. And so in total casualties, which means that these soldiers are no longer worthy to fight, they've lost around 100,000 troops, which is half of their initial invasion force, and around, 16%, I believe, of the actual Russian armed forces in general. So I hope that answers the question. We are getting these figures from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, which has been publishing generally verifiable figures so far. After a while, like 2 or 3 days, the Russians did come out and confirm one of their figures, around 10,000 killed, and so we do know that their numbers are usually pretty accurate. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Khan Azor, who says, Enforcer, do you think the Russian anti-air was just pulled back because they kept getting hit?
I think that may be one of the reasons. I think that may be, as a whole, the entire reason that the Ukrainian Air Force is now starting to operate more and more near the front as time is passing is because either the anti-air defenses that are in that area have been destroyed and weakened to the point that it'll be a while before they can restore those, air defenses, or a decent amount of them have been withdrawn because they're being lost at such a rate. It may be one or the other, but I do believe that is a pretty reasonable explanation as to why that's occurring. And so with that, I hope that answers that question, and we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from June Bug, who says, have you heard about China doing extreme military practices over Taiwan last week? I think a war will break out there soon.
Well, I thank you very much for the question, but to answer that question, I don't think that the Chinese will be attacking Taiwan. I've gone into this before on stream, and it looks like now I'm starting to... A lot of people are starting to talk about things in general, and so I'll weigh in as much as I know about the Chinese situation here, since I weighed in on Israel, just to be fair, and explain what I know about what's going on over there. Taiwan and China are actually the same country. They're actually one, and I'm not saying that like the Chinese communists own Taiwan. I'm saying that they actually both have legitimate claims to each other's land. Taiwan actually used to be the Republic of China back in the 40s, and they controlled pretty much all of eastern China, except for the provinces far out in the west. Those were actually controlled mostly by warlords and were pretty much their own independent country. But beyond that, they actually controlled most of mainland China, and then during the Chinese Civil War, which started in 1949 and went on to... I think 1953. Really, it's still going on till this day. But the Republic of China was defeated by the Chinese communists and eventually was exiled to the island of Taiwan, which was under Chinese control, the Republic of China's control, and still remains so to this day. Of course, the name has changed around the world. It's no longer called the Republic of China. People call this country Taiwan, although its official name is still the Republic of China. On the other hand, the Communist Chinese, who are called the People's Republic of China, actually existed for an incredibly good while. Around the 30s, they actually were a pretty notable force in China, although not massive. They were still, I guess you could say, considerable. Of course, you can go and watch this guy's video. Oh man, I forgot his name. He doesn't do YouTube videos anymore, but he was a hilarious guy. He did little stick figures. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick. YouTube... Chinese Civil War. Let me see if I can find this. Oh man, if I can find it, that's going to be great. Wait a minute. Let me think. Eels. Let me type in eels. Does someone know what I'm talking about in the chat? Hopefully. Let's see. What was the guy's name? Eels. Eels meme. Freud meme. Sam O'Nella. There we go. Sam O'Nella. If you're into a pretty good joke, watching a historical video with a lot of good jokes in it, Sam O'Nella doesn't do videos anymore, as far as I know. But this man was like the perfect deliverer of history along with jokes. Like, if y'all think I'm good, this guy's good. He has a video on the Chinese Civil War somewhere in here, although I'm not going to be able to probably find it. But it was good. And it had a pretty good summary of like a gist of pretty much what the whole entire Chinese Civil War was about in a pretty short answer. I'm glad to see that some people have seen are saying that Sam O'Nella is awesome. He's incredibly good. But still, the Chinese Civil War unfolded in that way, so both countries pretty much have claims to both of these lands. And the People's Republic of China, which is the much more powerful of the two, is laying claim to Taiwan, since it pretty much is a part of China. The Republic of China means that the People's Republic of China will not gain access to this land. They actually have a military strategy where they will fight for every bloody inch of that island if the Chinese were to try and attack it. And we do know that the United States, while kind of keeping a neutral stance on both of them, would most likely pick Taiwan's side if anything was to hit the curb. So that's kind of what's been keeping the Chinese back from actually attacking Taiwan and taking it over. Also, the communists. The United States' natural enemy beyond the 20th century has been communists. So, just for y'all to know that we will always lean on the side of a dictatorship or a democracy over a communist country. So, with that kind of historical context in mind, which I poorly explained and I really used as a plug for Salmonella, the Chinese want it, but they've been wanting it forever. I mean, like, they've been doing this kind of stuff since the 60s. So I don't think that they'll actually be invading Taiwan, to keep my answer a little bit short, because I feel like it's going way over time. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Vanilla Von Chivalry, who says, how many Russian BTGs have been lost?
Oh man, I don't even know if we could attain a figure for that. Well, actually, no. Let's go pull up Russian losses today. Let's see here. Kyiv Independent. Kyiv Independent. Come on, yeah. Access it. There we go. Kyiv Independent. We got anything on losses? War. Okay. Losses. No. Golly. Alright, so let's just go with 1,200 main battle tanks. So let's just go off of that figure alone. If they have lost 1,200 main battle tanks, each BTG has 10. So 1,200 divided by 10. They've lost enough tanks at this point that 120 BTGs have been entirely depleted of their main battle tanks. So to give you an idea of how many BTGs may have been wiped out in terms of their actual tank force, 120 of them have been wiped out so far. So I hope that answers the question, at least in a general gist. Of course, that's not a perfect answer. We would really have to get down and dirty into the figures and figure out how many BTGs have actually been destroyed. But I hope that answers the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And real quick, before we move on to the next question, let me recognize a $110 donation from Yoli H and a $50 donation from Teresa Andrioli, and then a $20 donation that just came in from Susan G. Thank you very much to all of you for your support. We've kind of stalled a little bit on the fundraiser, so thank you for keeping it going. And once again, if anybody else would like to donate, please feel free to do so, and hopefully we can reach our goal before the stream ends tonight. So up next, we have a question from Robert Gandara, who says, have you heard that Russia is using sailors from its navy to beef up its army in the invasion?
Yes, that is something that the Russians have normally done throughout history. They're actually called naval infantry, which is an archaic tactic, to say the least. It kind of reminds me of Roman times. While I'm not exactly a historian on the classical era, the Roman times, you would see naval infantry disembark from their ships and fight on land, because pretty much at the time, naval battles were just large land battles that occurred on boats at sea instead of what you're thinking about today. So yes, that is something that I have heard about before, and I know it has been a strategy of the Russians for a long amount of time. And so I hope that does answer the question. And how about this, y'all? How about I'm gonna make a deal. I'm actually going to lower the goal down to $15,000. But we have to reach $15,000. Can we do that? Because as long as the goal is reached, the money will go out. So I'm actually going to lower it so that way we can make sure that it does make its way out. Tonight may just be a slow night, and that's understandable. A large amount of support came through with Doctors Without Borders last week on last Sunday. So I think a lot of people may be burned out, which is fine. It's understandable. I get, where everyone's coming from with that. But hopefully we can reach 15,000, because of course any amount of support helps. So let me go through here and switch that goal real quick. And while I do that, let's move on to the next question, Matthew.
And real quick, just a shout out to Aaron Pac-Man. Thank you for the $20 donation. And moving on to the next question we have here from Will Riley, who says, Dick Cheney was walking through a field, stepping on mines to disable them, and wondered if you believed that there was any word on if the Belarusian military was ready to mobilize.
I don't think they're ready to mobilize, and we've seen that the Belarusians are starting to say very nice things about the Ukrainians. Of course, it's wonderful to hear that Dick Cheney is doing his job out there, and he is stepping on the mines, trying to help everyone out a little bit. But sadly, fortunately for the Ukrainians, the Belarusians are not ready to go, and I don't think they ever will be. There's no indication at all that there's actually been a sizable force buildup by the Belarusians, rather than the little clip of news we got a while ago where the Belarusians said they were moving forces down to the Ukrainian border in response to a Ukrainian military buildup, and then beyond that, there's been no alarms, bells, or whistles saying that that force has gotten any larger. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one. Oh, wait a minute. We just reached 13K. Thank you, Michael Stackpole, so much for getting us to the next 1,000. We only have 2,000 left, y'all. 2,000. If we can reach it, we have once again achieved another goal for this Leaf Spring Army, albeit it was lowered a little, it was lowered from 20,000 to 15,000, but it's still something within arm's reach. So let's all get together and let's help this thing out that much more and get to 15K, y'all. I know we can do it. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And let me give a shout out to Junebug, who puts in a $5 donation. CA Lags puts in a $5 donation. And you already mentioned the one from Michael Stackpole. Thank you very much. And then we have a $50 donation from David Schwartzfigure and a $20 donation from Alan Gallardo. Let's see here. And that appears to be all for the moment. So once again, thank you all for your support. And as the Enforcer said, we have hit 13,000. So moving on to the next question, we have from Duncan VR, who says, my question is, when Russian tank crews run for the hills, where do they go after their tanks are destroyed? Back to HQ and report their tank was blown up, or punishment,
When they run, they kind of just become like a video game character. They just dissolve. I don't know what happens to the Russian crews when they abandon their vehicles. I've never seen them being picked up by Ukrainians, and I've never seen what happens to them if the Russians get them. So sadly, I can't answer that question. They just kind of disappear into oblivion from what I know. But I do thank you very much for the question. I hope that does answer it, at least as far as I know, because I don't even know a lot about what's happening to those crews. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quick, we have a $20 donation from S. Moore. And I had no idea that Sockeye Sandwich could donate money. I didn't know
that. Yeah, that's something wild, really. I mean, like the Sockeye Nation, it's actually apparently pulling some money out of its treasury to give to this donation. So I thank the entire Sockeye Nation for supporting this fundraiser.
Yes, and we do have a $50 donation from Puka Lu. Thank you very much for your donation. And we have a $20 donation from Bearcat. And let's see here. It looks like Anonymous put in a $5 donation. Thank you very much to all of our anonymous donors. Then we have a $50 donation that just came in from RZBK08. And that is all for the moment. Thank you all again for your support. And up next, we have a question from Digifix, who says, Enforcer, do we believe the news on Putler's ailments?
I'm not really, well, actually, I do believe the news on Putin's ailments. We know that he had cancer well before the war, and so now we're starting to hear that apparently he has some kind of blood cancer, which there is absolutely no treatments for, really, rather than complete, like, blood transfusions and stuff, and that only allays the impending doom. So hopefully the medical information is true. As far as we know, it is, and hopefully he'll be meeting his demise incredibly soon. If it's not at the hands of a Ukrainian assassin or someone like that, it'll be at the hands of his own poor health. So with that, I hope that answers the question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Pakatang, who says, Enforcer, why don't more shells explode above the target instead of on impact? Is this a significant difference between NATO shells and Russian-made shells?
Could you reread that to me real quick?
Yeah, they said, Enforcer, why don't more shells explode above the target instead of on impact? Is this a significant difference between NATO shells and Russian-made shells?
Well, I thank you very much for the question, and to answer it the best I can, there is a difference in between airburst and, I guess you could say impact explosions. Impact explosions actually have a much smaller shrapnel burst area, and it is going upwards instead of downwards. Airburst shells actually project all of their shrapnel forward in the direction that they were flying, downwards towards infantry. Airburst is incredibly effective against infantry units, while direct impact artillery shells are most effective against enemy vehicles. So I believe that may be the reason why we're seeing a lot of direct impact explosions, is because they're pretty much, the entire modern world is geared around fighting vehicles more so than infantry alone. So I hope that answers the question. Of course, I'm not entirely knowledgeable about why that is the case, but I hope that that does answer it. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from JD. We have a $20 donation from Super Creech, and then we have a $20 donation from Praise Adonai, who has been around for quite some time, and Anonymous puts in some more $5 donations as well. Once again, thank you. And moving on to our next question, we have from Duncan VR again, who says, are these Ukrainian fighter jets that we see are the ones that have been supplied by other countries? I can't wait for Ukraine to start flying the F-16s.
Well, hopefully we will be seeing some more fighter aircraft coming in from the west. We haven't seen any right now, I believe, rather than the Romanian MiG-21s, but we've never seen evidence of those flying or evidence of them being transported into Ukraine to be used. So sadly, I really can't comment on those all too well. To answer your question, we do know that the Lend-Lease can pertain to Western aircraft, of course, the United States aircraft like the F-15 and the F-16, but I'm not entirely sure if it is within the drawings and the plans to send them over. Of course, the Russians are very adamant about making sure that the Ukrainians do not get any sort of resupply of their aircraft or any kind of replenishment, specifically with Western equipment or even former Soviet equipment from the Poles. So I hope that answers the question the best I can answer it, but right now it looks like aircraft are kind of not on the table if I had to pick a direction to lean in. Before we move on, I was just wondering, Matthew, if you would like to maybe, take the night off. You sound exhausted. We were working in the yard today, and Matthew was working a whole load, and so I'm just wondering if you would like to. I could, of course, carry on, make sure to recognize all the super chats stuff if you want, just making the offer.
Oh, no, that's fine. I can keep going. We have quite a few questions here that viewers have put in. I'd like to make sure that they get answered.
All right, and with that, on to the next question.
So up next, we have a question from Douglas Newman, who says, Enforcer, I can't wait until the Enforcer reports on U.S. and international news in a non-political fashion. Would you be sending reporters to different places for on-site news reporting?
Well, I thank you very much for the question. Of course, it's wonderful to hear that a lot of y'all are looking forward to the future of this channel and what we'll be doing. But to answer that question, we will not be having a large amount of reporters. Once again, based off of what we've been seeing, our budget will be somewhat small. So it'll really just be me going around and doing reporting. And we're still editing that first video. Hopefully it'll come out and look pretty good. But to keep in mind what we will be doing, just to give a couple of ideas, one of my ideas is energy dependence. Of course, that is a massive issue right now with gas prices soaring. The question is, what will happen in terms of where the United States supplies its energy grid? Will it be supplied domestically, or will we still try and outsource our energy to foreign countries? And of course, that's a question. And I don't want anyone to get in a fight in the comments about this. I'm talking about it, of course, from a neutral stance. There's many interesting different ways that you can look at it and explain why it should be one way or the other. That's really how politics works in every single regard, at least within my theory, is that everyone has a point, and there's really never a wrong answer politically. There's just different answers and different ways to get it done. So I know that there's probably a million people like, there are wrong answers. I promise you there is not. But still, that's a very interesting question to delve into, because you can see some reasons why the United States was still trying to outsource the energy foreignly and go to foreign countries and try and have some economic sway with them. At the same time, there's a large amount of stability to be had if the energy was produced domestically and the United States pretty much produced its own oil and then exported the extra amounts that it had, although we do that to a large amount already. So there's very interesting points to both of them, and I think political issues like that could, of course, be looked at in a very non-biased way and present both sides' arguments clearly and effectively, and let people just see the information about both of them and let them decide with a clear conscience, not trying to guide them any direction, which one would they find most suitable without trying to guide them to either one. And I, of course, think that would be an incredibly interesting spin to take, because whenever I take a look at the news briefly, like, for example, you go to CNN, they're all for, energy dependence. If you go to Fox, they're all for energy independence, and they make it clear, and there's no discourse or conversation or bringing up of the points on both of them as to why both of them are viable options, and both of them should be looked into seriously. And so I think that that's something we should do here on this channel, and that's how all news stories are going to be covered whenever we get to that point here on this channel, because I think that would be the hallmark of news, and I think it'd be an incredibly successful format if I didn't try and guide y'all to think what I want y'all to think, but I just gave y'all the information, just completely unbiased, just told y'all the information and said, what do y'all think? I would love to hear y'all's comments in the chat, in the comment section. And I think that would be a great way to go about news. Let me know in the comment section here if y'all think that as well, because I like that idea, and I think it's a pretty good way to go. And while I may be pro-Ukrainian right now, of course, there's really no other option rather than be pro-Ukrainian. If you're not pro-Ukrainian, you're pro-Russian pretty much. So, of course I'm going to be pro-Ukrainian, and I'm putting a bit of a bias on it in a way. And of course, there wasn't here at the beginning. this bias is kind of developed after watching the Russians slaughter kids and families for, about 3 months at this point. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from the 144 who says, Enforcer, if the Azovstal area has been evacuated of civilians now, can Ukraine fire on the Russians there since the defenders are deep inside?
Is he talking about the Azovstal? I want to make sure again. I may have missed that first part.
Yeah, he's talking about the Azovstal.
Yes, they could fire into the Russian areas of the Azovstal because, of course, once again, there are no civilians there. And once no civilians are there, the rules of war start to become a lot more in the gray area. You can do a lot of things that would be considered immoral and get away with it just because there's only combatants there. So, to answer that question, yes, they could fire into the areas that the Russians are in inside the Azovstal right now. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from Peter M, who says, what if Medvedev takes over?
If Medvedev takes over, or Medvedev, I'm not really sure which one it is. Maybe Medvedev, I'm sure. But if Medvedev, which is a real tongue, well, let me pull that up. I got to make sure I'm saying that one correctly. Medvedev, because I've always heard it said Medvedev. Medvedev, it's actually Medvedev. Okay. Apparently I was wrong with that. But if Medvedev took over, Medvedev is always considered the more neutral version of Putin. And so I think that we may see a bit of a backtracking of what's going on right now, but not to a large amount, because Medvedev, of course, will have the pressure of carrying on what his predecessor started if he dies in circumstances where he's hailed as like a martyr for Russia or some kind of hero. So I hope that answers the question, at least in brief. Once again, I can't really get into that all too well, because I'd have to be inside the mind of Medvedev to give that answer, and sadly, I'm not. So, unfortunately, I'm not an expert on what Medvedev will do, but that's what I'm thinking would most likely happen. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from BSG Wolf, who says, how much danger is Zaporizhzhia in right now?
Zaporizhzhia is not in a large amount of danger. Once again, the front line is 20 miles away from Zaporizhzhia, and we know that the Ukrainian front lines are holding strong in that area, and we have not seen any sort of give or faltering in them for the past week. Well, actually, not the past week, about the past 2 to 3 weeks. So, for the large part, I don't think Zaporizhzhia is in a large amount of danger, and I especially don't believe that Dnipro is in a large amount of danger at all, considering that the closest front line to them is like some 60 miles away. And let me make sure. Yep, it's about 70, actually. So with that, I hope that answers the question about Zaporizhzhia and Dnipro. I don't feel like either of them are in a large amount of danger. Whoops, just dropped something over here. Let me grab that real quick, and I hope that answers the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Tony Westara, who says, Enforcer, another question. It's probably stupid, but why hasn't Russia tried to join NATO? That would make things a lot better.
Well, Russia hasn't tried to join NATO because Russia still wants to have its own, I guess you could say diplomatic sphere. You've got to remember that Russia is the head of their own form of NATO called CSTO, which is made up of a decent amount of former Soviet countries like Belarus, Kazakhstan, and some of the Stan series of countries south of Kazakhstan like Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and I believe Uzbekistan as well, or Turkmenistan, but I can't really tell you that for certain. So they're kind of trying to still maintain their political influence that they had at a time before, but it's not working out for them. And so, sadly, they're not going to join NATO because they consider the West their rivals, both culturally and historically. And so, sadly, I just don't think there's ever going to be a time where it comes down to that. But I do thank you very much for the question. I hope that does answer it. But just due to the historical context in between Russia and the West, I just don't believe that that would be a viable option for anyone involved. So with that, I thank you very much for the question. I hope that did answer it. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from S. Moore, who says, Enforcer, have you been following the shipping of stolen Ukraine wheat?
I have not been following the shipping of stolen Ukrainian wheat. We have been hearing a few reports about that and have seen a couple of videos about that as well. But sadly, we're not getting any hardcore figures or statistics showing us how much wheat has been stolen. Wow, look at me. But stolen, and where it's actually going and where it's being used. We know that the Russians are going through a grain shortage, so pretty much they're doing a little bit of marauding to make sure that their people don't start to starve due to the shortages. But at the same time, I don't really know a lot of information about it, sadly. So I'm going to have to declare ignorance on it. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Mark Stuber, who says, Enforcer, do you think the Ukrainians will have less problems than the Russians with river crossings Do they have the training, tactics, and equipment to mitigate the risk of bunching up?
Hmm. Was he talking about the Ukrainian soldiers or the Russian soldiers right there?
Ukrainians.
Okay, I was just making sure. For some reason, I thought it was Russians. To answer that, well, if it was the Russians, I would have just told you about the Donetsk bridge near Severodonetsk and just told you, look at that, and tell me if they can do that or not. But to answer that question about the Ukrainians, we know that the Ukrainians have laid down a decent amount of pontoon bridges, and pontoon bridges in general are a very dangerous thing. Pontoon bridges, of course, can be spotted by military satellites and also reconnaissance drones and aircraft, and their locations, of course, will be publicized from then on for the end until the end of all time. Once again, whoa, we've reached the $14,000 goal. Thank you, everyone. We only have $1,000 to go. $1,000, everyone. That's not a lot. If we all come together and chip in, we can make it to $15,000. I've already put in $100, and Ariel is the Leaf Spring Army going to help me reach that $15,000 goal. I know y'all are, so let's make sure to get to it. But to continue answering your question, the Ukrainians will most likely be able to conduct bridge crossings better than the Russians, but at the same time, pontoon bridges and the bridge crossings involved are risky, considering that their locations are highly televised once they're set up, and Russian military will most likely be targeting them, because bridges of any form are strategic assets, and destroying them, of course, is denying the enemy of that advantage in a way. So I thank you very much for the question, and I hope that does answer it. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And real quick, let me recognize two of our donors tonight that have put us over that $14,000 mark. We have a $50 donation from Michael Summers and a $170 donation from Putin, my butt win. Thank you very much to both of you. Very, very big help. We're only $1,000 away from our goal, so very close. Looks like we're at $14,054, so we are definitely getting there, and hopefully we can reach it here in a short amount of time. So next up, we have a question again from Tony Westara, who says, can or will Turkey block Finland and or Sweden from joining NATO?
Turkey will not try and prevent NATO, Sweden, we'll just call it that, from joining NATO just for the hell of it. There's no reason for them to do that, and it would be putting NATO at a large disadvantage. A lot of people are believing, and I believe it has a lot of merit, that the Turks are trying to leverage the situation to their advantage and get some kind of concessions, either through economic I guess you could call it incentives or something like that, to ensure that this vote passes and goes through. They are the only country right now that are objecting to Sweden joining NATO, and so I do think that, give it a little bit of time, there's probably going to be a decent amount of negotiations with countries like the United Kingdom, France, the United States, with Turkey, and also Germany as well, since they're a large economic player in Europe, and they'll be trying to get Turkey to switch their vote by offering them incentives. So I think that's the direction this is going in, and I don't think Turkey is going to stop Sweden from joining intentionally. I think this is something of a political play, a diplomatic play for them. And so I hope I answered that question the best I could, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And real quick, thank you, Claire Haworth, hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly, for your $50 donation, and thank you, Dead Dawn, for your $20 donation. We're getting closer to our goal with every single donation. So up next, we have a question from Yvette Hernandez, who says, what is the closest front line to the steel plant, and can't they use the new howitzers to get in range to attack the front, like closest to the steel plant?
Well, I thank you very much for the question, but to answer that, the nearest front line, as far as we know, is near Volnovakha, which is around 30 miles away. Of course, we'll have to pull up the range of the M777 once again to see how far it can reach, and it can reach some... Oh man, it's not going to tell me. Effective firing range is around 25 miles with the Excalibur round, so it's actually out of range, even at the closest point in the front line. So sadly, the M777s will not be of use for Mariupol. To answer that question, that pretty much answers both of the questions. The closest front line is near Volnovakha, as far as we know, and also the artillery would not be able to reach it and provide support to the defenders within Mariupol. So sadly, that's the answer. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And with that, we are actually out of questions in the spreadsheet. So if anybody has any questions that you want to be answered, please put them in the chat and tag either one of us, and we will try to answer them. And here's one actually right now from Mech Tactical, who says, Enforcer, why have we not seen Rolling Thunder tactics from World War I and World War II with the use of artillery?
Well, that's an incredibly good question, and the reason why is because of the radio. And that's like, what the hell? You know, you're probably thinking like, what does that mean? Like, what does a radio that's playing like music and stuff have to do with why creeping barrages don't occur anymore? It's a great question, and here's the answer. During World War One, because communication with the infantry was very difficult, if not impossible sometimes, and mostly had to be done by messenger, carrying pigeon, carrier pigeon, or by telegraph, and sometimes infantry did not have access to a telegraph cable at the front. The messages in between the infantry and the artillery and the command that would then disseminate that information to the artillery took an incredibly long amount of time. And so in World War One, the artillery had to be planned in advance, and pretty much everything that was going to happen on that battlefield had to be choreographed down to a T. That's why if you ever watch World War One movies, you'll always see them say, all right, calibrate your watches. Right now it's 1700. Y'all be going over the top at 2100. That's what they were doing. They had to make sure that the timing was just right. Those soldiers had to go over the top at the specific minute they were supposed to, because the artillery was also going to start firing at a specific time. And the strategy of artillery fire back in the day that was very common was the creeping barrage, where in the perfect world, the artillery would have been a decent ways in front of the infantry and would have pretty much walked with them over no man's land to the German trenches, and then by the time the firing from the artillery ceased, the infantry would be right on top of the enemy trench within like 50 yards or less, and they would be able to just overrun the Germans or whoever they were, and well, the Germans, the French, I mean, like both sides were using the strategy, and then take that trench. That was at least the principle in theory. Whether it worked or not, it really didn't. On top of that, it's really hard to calibrate artillery fire back then because, of course, the spread was a little bit wider, so it wasn't like a perfect line of artillery explosions that were in front of the infantry as they moved across no man's land. And on top of that, it took a lot of coordination from the commanders because the infantry could not go too fast or too slow, because if they went too slow, the creeping barrage was going to outpace them. Then they'd be caught in no man's land under enemy fire and just get slaughtered, because they weren't close enough to the trench to effectively take advantage of the creeping barrage, and they were also too far away from their trench to retreat in time to not get mowed down. And if they moved too fast, they ran the risk of pretty much walking into their own artillery fire and getting decimated and turned into mist pretty much. So it was a pretty difficult thing to coordinate, and it almost never went right, honestly, for either side. So that is the reason why those kinds of artillery barrages occurred in World War One. In World War II, they did still occur, but much less. And that's because a massive technological innovation had been made in between World War One and World War II. And that was the wireless radio. And that's something that a lot of people take for granted these days, much like we're taking drones for granted right now. But we'll see as war goes on, this is going to become an important facet. The drone, much like the radio, became an important facet of war from the time of its inception to now. It's still being used. The wireless radio allowed for a single infantry unit to relay its artillery commands where it needed the artillery exactly, instantly. There was no messengers involved, no carrier pigeons, no time was wasted. It was instantaneous delivery of information from the infantry to the artillery, and the fire orders were immediately received. Much like we're seeing with drones now. That's now even a quicker delivery of the information of where the artillery is landing, which is of course an improvement in communication and efficiency. And that's what you saw in World War II. And so in World War II, you started to see what they're doing with artillery today, and it was kind of in its infancy then. If you looked at an American infantry unit, let's just say they're in France, we're going to come up with a very, very fake situation where they were near this village of Laon. I think that may be how it's pronounced. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. But anyways, they're near this village out here in the farm field, and they start taking fire from a German squad, and they're pinned down by an MG42. They know exactly where on the map this is, and so they call up on the radio, we need fire at these coordinates. They list off the coordinates, and the artillery has those immediately. The artillery, which is a few miles behind the lines, behind the infantry, immediately puts in those coordinates, fires off a ranging shot. That shot lands, the infantry adjusts the shot, they fire again, or the shot was on mark. The shot lands closer to the infantry, then they tell them that's dead on. The artillery starts laying into the enemy infantry. That's how the creeping barrage died, and the more ad hoc, on the spot kind of artillery barrages we see in the modern world happened. And it all happened because of radio communications. And we're now seeing that evolve even further with the drone. The drone is now the new form of the radio. Now the infantry doesn't actually have to be there to even see these units. The drone can fly out there, look at them, and then the artillery is literally looking at what they're firing at right there on screen, right there in their unit. And so now they can make the artillery fire a lot more accurate and a lot more precise. So that's kind of like my historical explanation of why the creeping barrages aren't being used anymore, and I hope it's a pretty good one, because that's kind of like World War I is kind of the area that I look into the most. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And just real quick, a big thanks to a longtime channel supporter, Mycroft, for putting in a $110 donation on the fundraiser. Thank you very much for that, Mycroft. We appreciate it. And up next, we have a question from Charles Watson, who says, Enforcer, has there been any reports that you know of that confirm the use of drone swarms?
No, we haven't seen any use of drone swarms. We've been seeing individual drones being used on a one-on-one kind of situation where there's only one or maybe two, because we have seen drones taking pictures of each other every once in a while, but usually it's just a standalone one drone doing a job. I think that drone swarms will be a thing of the future, but one thing that someone did bring up, well, actually two things that someone brought up, was EMPs, electromagnetic pulse devices, and flak cannons. I don't think flak cannons will be making their way back. I think it would be something more like a man-pad that would be used to take out a drone swarm, but at the same time, they can be defeated. You know, just because it's a large amount of drones in one spot doesn't mean there is some kind of counter to it. But right now, there is no defense to a drone swarm. And so I think it would be a viable tactic to use if you get a large amount of cheap drones with small amounts of explosive charges on them and just fly them in a massive swarm towards an enemy unit and then just have them all explode. You know, suicide drones, like the little, what are they called? Switchblade drones, and also the Phoenix Ghost, I think they're called, that were provided to the Ukrainians. I think if you got a large amount of those in a swarm and just started attacking infantry platoons with them, I think it would be effective for the while until an effective defense was made against them. Of course, you're trying to take advantage in a war of what's happening now. The future doesn't really matter. If this tactic carried over into the next 20 years, lucky. If it helped out in this war right now, that's great. And so I think that a drone swarm would be interesting to see. I think it would be, at least in my layman opinion, a viable strategy for now, but a defense would be made against them. And of course, I'm not an expert on that kind of stuff. That's just my opinion. So I hope I've answered that question, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from GNF, who says, Enforcer, what do you think Russia's future in 5 years from now is? Will they be isolated from the rest of the world?
I think they will be isolated from the rest of the world. We're seeing that a lot of countries are actually saying that their sanctions may stay in place well after the war ends, which I kind of think defeats the reason of the sanctions, but still, I can't really blame anyone for doing it. But I think that we'll see them largely being isolated again, much like they were in Soviet times, and seeing a Russian outside of Russia will start to become a very rare occurrence. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have another question from Pakatang, who says, Enforcer, what Black Sea combat ships remain and which have been sunk?
Well, we know that a few of them have been sunk. We know that all of the Black Sea's fast attack boats have been sunk, which is, of course, hilarious to hear. We also know that the Moskva has been sunk. We know that the Orsk, well, actually, the sister ship of the Orsk, which unfortunately I forgot its name, was sunk in Berdyansk. And I believe that a landing craft or two has been destroyed at Snake Island, although I can't really tell you that for certain. So the Russians have lost a decent amount of naval forces, but the Black Sea Fleet isn't out of the fight yet. As far as we know, all the submarines are still operational, and all of the frigates, including the Admiral Makarov, which apparently we got false information saying that it had been hit, apparently it was not, so I just want to make sure to clarify that again. But as far as we know, those are all the ships that have been sunk so far in the Black Sea Fleet, which does leave a pretty sizable Black Sea Fleet out there, although it is kind of pathetic that they've lost this many ships in the ground war. So with that, I hope that answers the question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a chat from Lyle Murphy, who says, do you expect yourself or fans of this channel to be a target for retaliation for the information you put out and the support others are here giving?
No, I don't really think so. We haven't gotten any attacks really rare than DDoS attacks, and you do have to remember that the entire Western world, by and large, is against Putin, and there are thousands of people out there just like me, so I don't really think that anyone's going to be coming for me or the viewers, you know, and on top of that, why in the world would they go after the viewers? You know, it's not like the Russians have, like, this unlimited capacity for whacking people like the Mafia or something, so I don't think they'll be coming for any of us. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And the next one is from Kellen Hansen, who says, how many of Russia's reported massive tank reserves are functional?
Not a lot. Really none of them. As far as we know, most of their tank reserves are rotting away in eastern bases in the country. And so I think, honestly, that they only have around 3,000 operational tanks from what we can assess. And also that would make sense, and it would line up with their military budget and how cheap the T-72s and T-80s are to operate. So I hope that answers the question in brief. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Yahweh, who says, Enforcer, give us an update on the town of New York, located right near Donetsk.
Unfortunately, I cannot give you an update on that town. I haven't gotten a lot of information about it, but I do know that there is a New York in Ukraine, which is hilarious to me, but still really cool nonetheless. I'm sure that that it has a different pronunciation, obviously, because they're speaking Ukrainian, but that's still really cool to me that anything's even called New York in Ukraine. That's a real honor, that there's one city called, well, a town called New York over there in Ukraine. So with that, sadly, I can't give you any information on it. I don't know of any right now. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a chat from Ryan Hill, who says, what do we know about the new commander of the territorial defense of Ukraine, and why was the old one replaced?
Well, right now, oh man, unfortunately, I can't really go into that one because sadly, I don't get into, of course, a lot of the command structure changes. We do know that two Ukrainian generals were dismissed due to their poor conduct in the southern front near Kherson. It's actually been alleged that they didn't prepare the defenses properly, or they may have allowed for the Russians to take it much easier than anticipated. But sadly, I don't know a lot of information about the change of command in the Territorial Defense Force. So I'm going to have to declare ignorance on that one. Unfortunately, I can't answer it all too well. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quick, Paolo Corradini is taking us up with the fundraiser, putting in a $110 donation. Thank you very much, Paolo, for your, I think that's his second donation of the night.
It sure is. And I got to thank you so much, Paolo, once again. And I also got to thank Naria. Of course, Naria throws in one super chat, so she doesn't get mentioned a lot. But I have to say that it's amazing that you sent in $2,000. That was impressive to see, and once again, I thank you so much for the massive amount of support. It helps out this channel a whole load. Well, not this channel, actually, sorry, correction. It helps out the fundraiser a whole load. For some reason, I was getting in super chat mode there, but it helps out the fundraiser a whole load, and that right there accounted for 10% of the total of the fundraiser for the night, and overall, right now that we've lowered it down to 15,000, let me think. Oh man, I can't even think of the percentage right now. I'm drawing a blank, but it was a massive amount. And I do thank Naria so much for that as well. And I also thank Paolo Corradini for coming in twice with Clutch with a 110 euro donation. I want everyone to know we are only $500 away from 15,000. So can we make it at 15,000? I'm going to be here until we do. So please help me get some sleep. If you want me to get some sleep, make sure to help me reach that $15,000 goal, and then I'll finally go to bed. Looks like Rabbit Squirrel the Garage wants me to go to bed, so hopefully a whole bunch of other people can help me get there. And so with that, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a chat from Gabby B, who says, is there an update on how many of the Russian army have been killed or loss of artillery?
Sadly, I won't be able to get you that figure for today, but I think that we do have a loss count for, I think, Monday. Let me look through these. Russian losses. Here we go. We have this for, no, wait a minute. This isn't Monday. This is day 79, which was, oh, unfortunately, I can't show you that, but it was day 79. Wait a minute. Nope, sorry. That's the wrong one. That's a video. Let me go through here and see if I can find it. I know that we have one for this week. I'm very certain of it. Oh, man. Let me look through these, y'all. I gotta find this one. Oh, man. Are you kidding? Let me look through these. Oh, my lord. Are you kidding me? Maybe this was on last week's map that I'm thinking about. I think it was. Yeah, it was. Sadly, I can't get you a figure to that today. I'll have to try and look through the casualty reports sometime around and see if I can find those. But sadly, I just don't have a number to pull off the top of my head. So I'm going to have to declare ignorance on that one for now, but I will try and get an answer for that one in the future. And so, with that, we're on to the next question.
And Enforcer, it looks like people want us to get some sleep. We have a $10 donation from Meg Hefner, a $50 donation from BC Skyman, a $20 donation from the Salmon, or S. Moore, excuse me, and also a $20 donation from Ed A. Let's see here, a $50 donation from Calm Energy. Anonymous puts in a $20 donation, and then Anonymous puts in another $5 donation. And it looks like we're sitting at $14,727. So we are remarkably close to reaching our goal and finally getting some sleep.
Yeah, and we're only $250 away. Now we're $230 away. Thank you, Loco Poco. We're going to get to bed a little bit quicker tonight, hopefully, than I'm expecting. But please, everyone, help us. We only have $230 left. That is 2 Ukrainian refugee families that could get the basic necessities to survive for the next month. And so please help us out, help us get some sleep, and also help those Ukrainian refugee families. And once we reach that goal, we'll probably answer like one more question, and then we'll end the night stream. And so with that, on to the next question.
And up next, we have a question from Steve Lowndes, who says, Enforcer, have you heard of the Russian tank T-14 Armada? Do they exist? And this is a question from Cheshire, England.
Well, I thank you very much for the question from Cheshire, England. Before I answer that, keep that in mind, Matthew, what the question is. Let's pull up Cheshire, England. I'm actually a huge fan of Britain. I've been there before, and I have to say it's a very pretty place. Of course, it has its rough spots. Every country has its rough spots, but I like to look at the positive. And of course, Cheshire, or apparently it's Chester as well? Is that the case? Is that what I'm reading here? Oh, wait a minute, hang on. Directions. Oh, wait a minute, oh, wait a minute, that's going to show where I live. Okay, good thing I cut that off before I clicked directions. Oh, my lord, we were about to dox ourselves here on stream.
Oh, and Enforcer, we just hit $15,900.
Wait a minute, what?
Yes, let me see here if I can.
$1,000 from an anonymous donor. I thank you so much for your support. And we also had a massive amount of support coming from everyone else. Wow, goodness. Wait a minute, hang on, let me go look at that.
And let me read off a couple of these top donors we have here. We have a $5 donation from Dead Dawn. We have that $1,000 from Anonymous. We have a $25 donation from Yoli H, a $400 SEK donation from Martin Nilsson, and then we have a $20 donation from Mr. Lunchtime.
Hey, Mr. Lunchtime, he's turned around his life.
Yeah, and then we have a $200 donation from Wolfern KGP. Thank you very much for that. And it looks like, oh, yeah, we have even more. We have a 100 SEK donation from Krister Peterson and a $50 donation from Sharon Tukolsky.
And I thank you all so much for the support. Y'all want me to get to bed incredibly quickly, and now I can tell you, I lied. I'm going to answer this question. We're also going to... Wait a minute, was that Chester right there? It showed me for a second. Come on. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, you know what? I'm just going to pull this up again. Was it Chester or Cheshire, Matthew?
It was Cheshire.
I got to find this place. It's a county. Oh, it's a county. Okay. All right, that makes a lot more sense. But let me go to the map here, and let me show y'all Chester. We actually drove through Liverpool. Liverpool was an interesting city, and if y'all remember, that's actually where the White Star Line, and I believe the Cunard Line, is still headquartered, and that's also where the Beatles come from. Although I'm not a big fan of the Beatles, just being honest. Sorry if anyone likes them. But anyways, let's take a look at Chester, because I'm always a huge fan of British history. Of course, that's where my family comes from. And so it's just always cool to take a look at it whenever I get the chance. So let's take a look at the street here. Oh. Wait a minute, is the council actually fixing something? Wow. I bet the British are absolutely flabbergasted right now. The council is actually doing road work. Y'all complain about that until the end of time. And here we can see that they're making y'all eat your words, and they're actually fixing a road for once. By the way, I have to say that when I go over to Britain, the road quality in Britain is a lot higher than in Alabama here in the United States, although I'm not complaining, but still, it's better. So don't complain too much. But let's go to another area of Chester, and let's see what else we can see, because I'm interested now. I'm trying to find the part that looks like the old historic. This has got to be the old historic section here. The buildings look a lot smaller, and the roofs look a lot more narrow. Yes, I'm correct. This is the historic area of the city. And so we can see here where all of the tourist traps are, where all of the tourists come to the city to go and spend an excessive amount of money on antiques, coffees, and cafes. Of course, we can see a lot of British people here as well, it seems. But yeah, it's a pretty neat place. Actually, my favorite place in Britain, and it's going to blow y'all's minds, you know, because everyone always goes, oh, London, you know. No, it's not London, actually. My favorite place is York. We went to York, and that was an incredibly interesting city. It had an intact medieval wall around it, which was, of course, a very interesting quirk and feature of that town. It also has one of the largest railway museums in the world. I'm a big railway fan, so I like going in there and looking at that. And also, it's home to, I believe, the largest cathedral in Europe, York Minster, which is beautiful, by the way. If y'all actually go take a look at it, or ever get around there, go take a look at the place, because it's impressive. I'll show it to y'all here on Google Street View. Look at it. Hello?
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 Enforcer, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello? Apparently we're having some audio problems with Matthew, but I'm just going to keep going. York Minster looks pretty cool. In fact, the whole entire town's pretty neat. And you can see the medieval wall here. And York was actually saved. Of course, there's a lot of towns that were like this before the war. And I'm talking about World War II here. But Hitler actually was a pretty sick guy, so he actually picked the cities that had the most cultural value to Britain and pretty much singled them out to be bombed into oblivion. So if you go down to a city like Exeter, per se, you can actually see a lot of scars from the war, as there will be modern buildings. Well, no, there will actually be older buildings, you know, like Victorian era and older than that, Tudor buildings. And then in the middle of all these buildings, you'll see this brand new modern building, and that one's there because the old building that was in its place was actually bombed by the Germans and destroyed. So that's an interesting little bit of British history there. That's why you may see some modern buildings mixed in between the old ones. They would all be old if the British had an option, and I can't complain. They have some pretty nice buildings. Anyways, to answer the question, now that I've harped on Britain for a long amount of time, the answer to your question is that the T-14 does exist, but it exists in limited numbers. As far as we know, there's only 14 of them, and they're all pre-production models. So none of those are actually, I guess you could say, field worthy. They're all testing prototypes in a way. They're all a little different. And so the honest answer, now that I've gotten all the way through like harping on Britain, the honest answer to that is that the Russians will never be able to field those tanks. That's really just the rundown of it. And so with that, I hope I've answered that question. We've actually surpassed $16,000. I didn't actually notice that while I was yip-yapping about nothing. But we had a $20 donation from Adam. We also had a $1 donation from Mamba Mentality. We don't forget anyone here. I know that we can't mention everyone, but we don't forget anyone. Philip Grandstrom, hopefully I'm pronouncing that name right. 160 SEK, Anonymous with $20. Louis A with $5. Nishin with $20. Anonymous with 20. And so I thank you all so much. We actually surpassed the 15,000 goal. We made it to 16,000. And I never doubted once that the Lee Spring Army would be able to achieve that goal. And so with that, that is going to wrap up tonight's stream. I hope that y'all all have enjoyed so much. I hope I've answered everyone's questions pretty well. And once again, the fundraiser was a success. We didn't reach 20,000, but we did lower the goal to 15,000, and then we did some extra and gotten an extra $1,000. So I thank you all so much once again. It is a huge amount of help, and it will go a long way in supporting Ukraine. So with that, I thank you all once again, and I'll see y'all all on Tuesday, because I am actually taking tomorrow's Monday off. I will definitely be doing that because I am exhausted at this point. So thank you all once again, and I'll see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time for the next week of Ukraine news. Thank you all, and I'll see you all then. Take care, and good night. Hey, if y'all are still watching the stream, Mr. Lunchtime. All right, that's it. Everyone have a great night. Take care.